A dusty letter, forgotten for months, lands on Hercule Poirot's desk. Its cryptic words whispering of a sinister plot. The incident of the dog's ball. Why was it delayed? Who wanted Emily Arundel dead? In the quaint village of Market Basing, a loyal terrier named Bob guards a deadly secret. As Poirot unravels a web of greed, poison, and betrayal, one question burns. Will a dog's silent testimony outsmart a cunning killer? The clock ticks. The truth hides. Can you guess? Who did it before Poirot does? Chapter 1. The letter that lingered. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Hercule Poirot's London apartment, casting a golden haze across the polished mahogany desk where he sat, his small neat hands sorting through a pile of correspondence with the precision of a surgeon. His mustache, waxed to impeccable points, twitched slightly as he scanned each envelope, his grey cells already humming with the quiet anticipation of a new puzzle. Beside him, a silver tray held a steaming pot of tisane and a single porcelain cup, its delicate aroma mingling with the scent of beeswax polish that clung to the room's furnishings. Captain Arthur Hastings, sprawled in an armchair by the window, leafed through the Times with a distracted air, his thoughts drifting to the cricket scores rather than the headlines. Mon ami, Poirot said suddenly, his voice cutting through the rustle of Hastings' newspaper. It is a curious thing, is it not, how a single letter can disrupt the order of one's day? Hastings glanced up, his honest face registering mild surprise. A letter? What's so special about it, Poirot? You get dozens every week. Poirot held up a cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly worn, as if it had traveled a long and circuitous route to reach him. The handwriting was spidery, elegant but unsteady, suggesting the hand of an elderly writer. This one, Hastings, is not like the others. It is dated the 1st of May, yet it arrives only now, on this fine morning of June the 28th, nearly 2 months delayed. And it speaks of a matter most intriguing. Hastings folded his newspaper, his curiosity piqued despite himself. Delayed, you say? Probably a mix-up at the post office. What does it say? Poirot's eyes gleamed as he slit the envelope with a silver letter opener, extracting a single sheet of paper. He adjusted his pince-nez and began to read aloud, his voice adopting the cadence of the writer's words. Dear Monsieur Poirot, I trust this letter finds you in good health. My name is Emily Arundel of Little Green House, Market Basing. I am an old woman, perhaps too old for such fancies, but I find myself troubled by an incident that occurred some weeks ago. It concerns my dog, Bob, and a ball that caused a most unfortunate accident. I hesitate to call it more than mischance, yet I cannot shake the feeling that something is amiss. My family surrounds me, yet I feel alone in my suspicions. If you could find it in your heart to visit, I should be most grateful for your counsel. Yours sincerely, Emily Arundel. Poirot folded the letter with care, his expression unreadable. What do you make of it, Hastings? Hastings frowned, rubbing his chin. Sounds like an old lady's nerves getting the better of her. A dog and a ball, hardly the stuff of crime, Poirot. Still, that delay's odd. Why didn't it reach you sooner? Precisement, Poirot murmured, tapping the envelope against his palm. The delay is the first thread of the tapestry. And this mention of the dog's ball vague, yes, but deliberate. Miss Arundel writes with purpose, yet cloaks her meaning. Why? Fear, perhaps, or a mind clouded by doubt. Hastings leaned forward, his skepticism giving way to interest. You're not thinking of traipsing down to Market Basing over this, are you? It's probably nothing, a tripped step, a harmless prank. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. My dear Hastings, you underestimate the power of the little ideas. A tripped step may conceal a push, a prank may mask a plot. No, we shall go to Market Basing. The train departs at noon. You will accompany me. Hastings sighed, knowing resistance was futile when Poirot's mind was set. Very well, but I hope there's a decent pub in this village. I've a feeling we'll need it. The journey to Market Basing was a pleasant one. The train chugging through rolling fields dotted with grazing sheep and hedgerows bursting with summer blooms. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit despite the warmth, gazed out the window, his thoughts elsewhere. Hastings, lulled by the rhythm of the rails, tried to engage him in conversation about rural life, only to be met with a raised eyebrow. Hastings, you speak of cows and cabbages as if they hold the secrets of the universe. It is the human heart, mon ami, that we must study. And in Market Basing, I suspect we shall find hearts full of secrets. They arrived at the small station just after 2 o'clock, the platform bustling with villagers carrying baskets of produce and children chasing one another in the afternoon heat. A hired car, arranged by Poirot's ever-efficient valet, George, awaited them, its driver tipping his cap as they climbed in. The drive to Little Green House took them through the heart of Market Basing, a picturesque village of thatched cottages, and a medieval church whose spire pierced the cloudless sky. Hastings remarked on its charm, but Poirot's attention was fixed on the road ahead, his fingers drumming lightly on the car's armrest. Little Green House stood at the edge of the village, a sprawling Georgian manor surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oaks. Its ivy-clad walls exuded an air of timeless dignity, though the paint on its window frames was beginning to peel, hinting at genteel neglect. As the car crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, A wire-haired terrier bounded from the porch, barking furiously before skidding to a stop at Poirot's feet, a rubber ball clamped in its jaws. "Bonjour, mon petit," Poirot said, crouching to pat the dog's head. "You must be Bob, the hero of our tale, Nan." The dog wagged its tail, dropping the ball as if in offering. Hastings chuckled. "Friendly chap, isn't he? Hard to imagine him causing any trouble." Before Poirot could reply, the front door opened, and a stout woman in a black dress appeared, her face a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice carrying the soft burr of the local accent. Poirot rose, removing his hat with a flourish. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are here concerning Miss Emily Arundel." The woman's expression clouded. "I'm Ellen, the housekeeper." "I'm sorry, sir, but Miss Emily passed away 3 weeks ago. Liver trouble," the doctor said. Very sudden. It was Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained courteous. "My condolences, Madame Ellen. Her death was unexpected, you say?" Ellen nodded, twisting her apron in her hands. Sir, she was frail, mind, but not poorly. Not till the end. The family's still here, sorting her affairs. Would you like to speak with them?" "We, if it is not an imposition," Poirot said smoothly. "And perhaps we may see the house, to pay our respects." Ellen hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in, then. I'll fetch Miss Teresa." The interior of Little Green House was as grand as its exterior promised, with high ceilings, oak-paneled walls, and a sweeping staircase that dominated the hall. A faint scent of lavender hung in the air, mingling with the mustiness of old books and furniture polish. Bob trotted ahead, his nails clicking on the polished floor, leading them to a drawing room where sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a collection of family portraits and antique furniture. As they waited, Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on a small table where a vase of roses stood beside a framed photograph of an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a determined jaw. "Miss Arundel, I presume," he murmured, stepping closer. The photograph captured a woman of formidable presence, her posture erect despite her age, her expression one of quiet authority. Hastings joined him, peering at the image. "She doesn't look like someone who'd scare easily. What do you suppose rattled her about that dog's ball?" Before Poirot could answer, the door swung open, and a young woman entered, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her silk dress whispering as she moved. She was strikingly beautiful, with high cheekbones and eyes that sparkled with intelligence, though her smile was guarded. "I'm Teresa Arundel," she said, extending a hand. "Ellen tells me you're here about Aunt Emily. I'm afraid you had a wasted journey. She's no longer with us." Poirot bowed over her hand, his manner impeccable. "Mademoiselle, I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Captain Hastings. We received a letter from your aunt, written some time ago, expressing concern about an incident. We wished to offer our assistance, but alas, we are too late." Teresa's smile faltered, her eyes flickering with something surprise, perhaps, or unease. "A letter? That's odd. Aunt Emily wasn't one for writing, not lately." "What did it say?" Poirot's expression was bland, but his eyes were sharp. "It spoke of an accident involving her dog, Bob, a matter she found troubling. Perhaps you can enlighten us." Teresa laughed, a light, brittle sound. "Oh, that must be the staircase. Business. Aunt Emily tripped over Bob's ball one night, took a nasty tumble. She was shaken, but no real harm done. Just one of those things." Hastings nodded sympathetically. "Accidents happen, especially with a lively dog like Bob." "Precisement," Poirot said, though his tone suggested he was far from convinced. "And yet, Mademoiselle, your aunt felt compelled to write to me, a stranger, about this incident. Why, do you think?" Teresa shrugged, her composure regained. She was getting on Monsieur Poirot. "Old people get funny ideas sometimes, or wouldn't read too much into it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another figure, a tall, fair-haired man in his 30s, whose easy grin and rumpled suit contrasted with Teresa's polished elegance. "What's this? Tess visitors?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. Teresa introduced him as her brother, Charles Arundel. He shook hands with Poirot and Hastings, his grip firm but his eyes restless, as if sizing them up. "Heard of you, Poirot, famous detective, eh? Come to poke about Aunt Emily's affairs?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Merely to honor a request, Monsieur Charles. Your aunt wrote to me before her passing. I wished to understand her concerns." Charles snorted, sprawling in a chair. "Concerns? The only thing Aunt Emily was concerned about was her precious Bob and her bank balance. Not that she'd part with a penny while she was alive." "Charles," Teresa hissed, her cheeks flushing, "don't be crude." Poirot observed the exchange, his head tilted slightly, like a bird studying a worm. "And you, monsieur, were close to your aunt." Charles grinned, unabashed. "Close enough to know she was a tough old bird. Loved her, in my way, but she wasn't one for sentiment. Kept us all on a tight leash, didn't she, Tess?" Teresa's lips tightened, but she said nothing. The tension between the siblings was palpable, a silent undercurrent that Poirot noted with interest, before he could press further. Ellen reappeared, announcing that tea was ready in the garden. The The group moved outside, where a table had been set beneath a spreading chestnut tree, its leaves casting dappled shadows on the linen cloth. Bob gambled about, chasing his ball, while a young woman with mousy hair and anxious eyes joined them. Introduced as Bella Tanios, Emily's other niece. Her husband, Jacob, a genial man with a faint foreign accent, followed, his arm around her waist. Tea was a strained affair, with Poirot steering the conversation deftly, probing without seeming to. He learned that Emily had been a wealthy woman, her fortune tied up in investments and property, much of it destined for her nieces and nephew, or so they had assumed. Bella spoke little, her eyes darting to her husband as if seeking reassurance, while Charles dominated the talk with tales of his exploits, including a recent attempt to break a water speed record on the Thames. Teresa, poised and aloof, deflected Poirot's questions with practiced ease, though her fingers toyed nervously with her napkin dot as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. Poirot's gaze fell on the staircase visible through the open French doors. A faint mark, barely noticeable, marred the polished wood of one step. He rose, excusing himself, and approached the staircase, Bob trotting at his heels. Kneeling, he examined the mark, a scuff, perhaps, or a scratch. His fingers traced it, his mind racing. Hastings, he called softly, beckoning his friend regardless. This market is not the work of a ballman. Hastings squinted, puzzled. Looks like wear and tear to me. What are you getting at? Poirot straightened, his eyes gleaming. I am getting at the truth, mon ami. This mark suggests something heavier than a rubber ball caused your Miss Arundel's fall. Something deliberate, perhaps. Hastings stared, his jaw dropping. You mean someone tried to kill her? Poirot's smile was grim. It is too soon to say, but the little grey cells, they are stirring. Come, let us return to our hosts. Back at the table, Poirot's demeanor was as charming as ever, but his questions grew sharper. He asked about Emily's health, her habits, her visitors in the weeks before her death. Bella mentioned a companion, Miss Lawson, who had been devoted to Emily but was currently visiting relatives. Jacob spoke warmly of Emily's kindness, though his eyes avoided Poirot's. Charles, growing restless, excused himself to take a call, while Teresa watched Poirot with a mixture of amusement and wariness. As they prepared to leave, Poirot paused. By Emily's grave in the village churchyard, a simple stone inscribed with her name and dates. The evening air was cool, scented with roses from a nearby garden. Bob, who had followed them, sat at Poirot's feet, his ball forgotten. May the 1st, June the 28th, Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. This delay, it must be explained. And you, mon petit Bob, what did you see that night? Hastings shivered, though the evening was mild. You really think there's something to this, don't you? Poirot turned, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I think, Hastings, that we have stumbled upon a mystery most dark, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall unravel it. The chapter closed with the sound of Bob's soft whine, a mournful note that lingered in the twilight as Poirot and Hastings walked back to their car, the weight of the investigation settling upon them. The train back to London was quiet, its compartments half empty, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a counterpoint to Poirot's thoughts. Hastings, dozing in his seat, stirred as Poirot spoke, his voice low but insistent. Hastings, consider the letter. Why was it delayed? A postal error, perhaps, but I think not. Someone wished it to arrive too late, when Miss Arundel could no longer speak for herself. Hastings rubbed his eyes, struggling to follow. But she's dead. Poirot. Natural causes, Ellen said. What's the point of digging into it now? Poirot's smile was faint, almost pitying. The point, mon ami, is justice. If Miss Arundel's fall was no accident, if her death was hastened by a human hand, then we owe it to her hand to Bob to find the truth. The train whistle sounded a long, mournful cry that echoed in the darkness. As Poirot leaned back, his mind already piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that would lead them deeper into the secrets of Little Green House. The following morning, back in London, Poirot sat at his desk. The letter from Emily Arundel spread before him. He reread it, his fingers tracing the words, searching for hidden meaning. The mention of Bob's ball, so innocuous on the surface, gnawed at him. Why had she singled it out? Was it a metaphor, or code, or simply the confused ramblings of an old woman? He summoned George, his valet, and dispatched him to gather information on the Arundel family, their finances, their reputations, their movements in the months before Emily's death. George, ever discreet, nodded and departed, leaving Poirot to his thoughts. Hastings arrived shortly after, his face flushed with excitement. Poirot, I've been thinking about what you said. If someone tampered with that staircase, they'd need access to the house. It has to be someone close to Emily family, maybe, or that companion, Miss Lawson. Poirot nodded, pleased by his friend's enthusiasm. You begin to think, Hastings? Yes, proximity is key, but motive, too, must guide us. Money, perhaps, or something deeper, resentment, fear, revenge. Hastings frowned, his mind grappling with the possibilities. Charles seems a bit of a rogue, always talking about his adventures, but I bet he's in debt up to his ears. And Teresa, she's cool as a cucumber, but there's something about her. Too polished, if you ask me. And Bella, Poirot prompted, his eyes narrowing. Hastings hesitated. She's quiet, nervous, hard to read. Her husband, Jacob, seems decent enough, but he's a bit of an outsider. Foreign, you know, might rub the family the wrong way. Poirot steepled his fingers, his gaze distant. A family divided. Hastings, each with their secrets, their desires. And at the center, Miss Emily, with her fortune and her suspicions. We must return to market basing. There is much to uncover. The second visit to Little Green House was arranged for the following day, Poirot insisting on meeting Miss Lawson and inspecting the house more thoroughly. He also requested access to Emily's papers, hoping to find a clue to the letter's delay or the incident with Bob's ball. As they prepared to depart, Poirot paused by the photograph of Emily Arundel, now placed on his mantelpiece. "You wrote to me, madame, because you trusted no one else. I shall not fail you." The journey to market basing passed in a blur, Poirot's mind occupied with the puzzle before him. Hastings, sensing his friend's intensity, kept silent, though his thoughts churned with images of the Arundel family, their faces a gallery of potential suspects. Upon arriving at Little Green House, they were greeted by Ellen, who seemed more at ease this time, though her eyes darted nervously to the staircase. Bob, as ever, was a whirlwind of energy, his ball in constant motion as he raced about the hall. Miss Lawson, a thin, fluttery woman in her 50s, awaited them in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know why you're here, but I'll help if I can. Miss Emily was so good to me." Poirot's smile was reassuring, though his eyes missed nothing. "Mercy, Mademoiselle Lawson. We seek only to understand Miss Arundel's final days. She wrote to me of an incident, a fall, caused by Bob's ball. Can you tell us of it?" Miss Lawson's face paled, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. "Oh, that dreadful night. I heard her cry out, and when I reached her, she was at the bottom of the stairs, so shaken. She said it was Bob's ball, left on the step. I scolded him, poor thing, but he looked so confused." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "And the ball, mademoiselle, where was it found?" Miss Lawson hesitated, her eyes flickering to the staircase. I don't rightly recall. Near the top, I think. It's all a blur." "I'm afraid," Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. "And Miss Arundel's health, after the fall?" "She was never quite the same," Miss Lawson said, her voice dropping. "Weaker, somehow. The doctor said it was her liver, but I wondered. She seemed so troubled." Hastings glanced at Poirot, sensing the weight of her words. Poirot, however, remained impassive, his questions flowing smoothly. He asked about visitors, letters, anything unusual in the weeks before Emily's death. Miss Lawson's answers were vague, her nervousness growing with each query. As they left the drawing room, Poirot paused by the staircase once more, his eyes fixed on the scuff mark. "Hastings, fetch Bob's ball, s'il vous plaît." Hastings complied, tossing the ball to Poirot, who placed it on the marked step, and gave it a gentle nudge. It rolled harmlessly to the side, stopping against the banister. "You see," Poirot said, his voice triumphant. "The ball does not cause such a mark. Something else was here, something meant to harm." Hastings swallowed, his mind racing. But who, Poirot, and why? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the hall. "That, mon ami, is what we shall discover. The letter, the fall, the death, they are threads in a web. And at its center, I suspect, lies a heart most cunning." The chapter drew to a close with Poirot standing by Emily's grave once more, the village church bells tolling softly in the distance. Bob sat beside him, his ball at his feet, his eyes fixed on Poirot, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "May the 1st, June the 28th, Poirot whispered, his voice a vow. "This delay, it must be explained. And you, mon petit, shall help me find the truth." Chapter 2, The Terrier's Tale. Hercule Poirot stepped off the train at Market Basing, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the gravel of the platform. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint hum of a village awakening. Captain Hastings, trailing behind with their modest luggage, adjusted his hat and inhaled deeply. Nothing like the countryside to clear the lungs. A Poirot, a far cry from the smog of London. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of amusement or perhaps mild disapproval. "The air, it is pleasant, mon ami, but the mind must remain clear no matter the setting. We are here not for the scenery but for the truth." His grey eyes scanned the station, noting the handful of villagers bustling about, a milkman balancing cans, a postboy whistling as he pedaled away, and an elderly woman feeding crumbs to a flock of sparrows. Every detail, no matter how small, was catalogued in Poirot's meticulous brain. Their destination was Little Green House, the late Emily Arundel's estate, a short carriage ride from the station. The driver, a ruddy-faced man named Tompkins, tipped his cap as they climbed aboard. "Sad business, Miss Arundel passing," he remarked, flicking the reins. "Fine lady, she was. Kept to herself mostly, but always a kind word for us folk." Poirot leaned forward, his gloved hands resting on his cane. "And this Little Green House, it is a grand place, Nan." "Oh, aye," Tompkins replied, his eyes on the winding road. Big old place, full of history. Miss Arundel's family's been there for generations. Mind you, it's seen better days. Needs a bit of upkeep, if you ask me. Hastings, ever the conversationalist, chimed in. And what about her dog? I hear she had a terrier. Lively sort, was it? Tompkins chuckled. Bob, you mean Lively's? An understatement. That dog's got more spirit than half the village. Always chasing his ball, tearing about the garden. Miss Arundel doted on him like he was her own child. Poirot's eyes gleamed at the mention of the dog. The letter from Emily Arundel, with its cryptic reference to the incident of the dog's ball, had lodged itself firmly in his mind, a seemingly trivial detail. Yet Poirot knew that in such trifles often lay the key to a mystery. He said nothing, allowing Hastings and Tompkins to prattle on about village life as the carriage rattled toward their destination. Little Green House loomed into view as they crested a gentle hill. It was a sprawling Georgian manor, its red brick facade softened by ivy that clung to the walls like an old friend. The windows gleamed in the morning light, but Poirot noted signs of neglect, a cracked pane here, a patch of peeling paint there. The gardens, though well-tended, had an air of restrained wildness, as if nature was slowly reclaiming what was hers. At the center of the lawn stood a weathered sundial, its shadow stretching long and thin across the grass dots as the carriage drew to a halt. A small, wiry shape bounded toward them, barking furiously. Bob, the wire-haired terrier, was a blur of white and brown, his tail wagging like a metronome. In his mouth, he clutched a well-worn rubber ball, which he dropped at Hastings' feet with an expectant look. Hastings laughed, bending to pat the dog's head. Well, aren't you a fine fellow? Full of beans, just as Tompkins said. Poirot, however, remained still, observing the terrier with the intensity of a scientist studying a specimen. Bob tilted his head, meeting Poirot's gaze with bright, intelligent eyes. For a moment, man and dog seemed to share an unspoken understanding. Then Bob barked once, snatched his ball, and darted toward the house, as if inviting them to follow. The front door opened, revealing Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, a stout woman, in her 50s, with a flour-dusted apron and a weary but welcoming smile. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We've been expecting you. Dreadful thing, Miss Emily's passing. Come in, I'll have tea ready in a jiffy." The interior of Little Green House was as grand as its exterior promised, though it bore the same subtle signs of decline. The oak-panelled hall was adorned with portraits of stern-faced Arundels, their eyes following the visitors as they passed. A wide staircase swept upward, its banister polished to a gleam but marred by a faint scratch near the top step, a detail Poirot noted with interest. The air smelled of lavender and beeswax, mingled with the faint mustiness of a house that had seen too many winters. Mrs. Jenkins led them to the drawing-room, a spacious chamber furnished with heavy velvet drapes, a mahogany sideboard, and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Above the mantel hung a portrait of Emily Arundel, depicted in her youth with a serene smile and a cascade of auburn hair. Poirot studied the painting, noting the strength in her jawline, the intelligence in her eyes. "A formidable woman," he murmured. "Aye, that she was," Mrs. Jenkins said, setting down a tray of tea and scones. "Never one to suffer fools, Miss Emily. Kept this house running like clockwork, even in her later years. And that dog of hers, Bob, was her shadow. Followed her everywhere." Hastings, already reaching for a scone, asked, "What's this about an accident? I heard Miss Arundel had a fall." Mrs. Jenkins' face clouded. "Yes, sir, back in April. Tumbled down them stairs, right there in the hall. Nearly broke her neck. Poor soul. We all thought it was Bob's ball that did it, left on the step. You see, he's always dropping at places. But Miss Emily, she wouldn't hear a word against him. 'My Bob's no fool,' she'd say. 'He knows better than to leave his ball where it'd do harm.'" Poirot's fingers paused on his teacup. "This ball, it was found on the stair after the fall." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, "Right at the top, bold as brass. I saw it myself when I helped her up. She was shaken, but no bones broken. Thank heavens. Dr. Granger said it was a miracle she wasn't worse off." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The detective's mind was already turning over the facts: a fall, a ball, a dog, blamed but a dog, perhaps unjustly accused. He set down his cup and rose, his movements deliberate. "Madame Jenkins, may we see the staircase?" The housekeeper blinked but nodded. "Of course, sir, this way." The staircase was as imposing up close as it had appeared from the hall, its steps worn smooth by generations of feet. Poirot ascended slowly, his eyes scanning each tread. Near the top, he paused, crouching to examine the banister. There, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a faint mark, a scuff, perhaps, or a scratch. He traced it with a gloved finger, his expression unreadable. Hastings, hovering behind, ventured, "Find something, Poirot." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, rising, "or perhaps it is nothing but the little grey cells. They are curious." He turned to Mrs. Jenkins. "And after this fall, Miss Arundel, she recovered fully?" "Well enough," Mrs. Jenkins said. "She was weak for a bit, kept to her bed for a week or two, but she was up and about soon enough, sharp as ever. Mind you, She was never quite the same after. Seemed worried, like something was weighing on her. Poirot nodded, filing this away. And her family, they visited often. Oh yes, Mrs. Jenkins said, her tone shifting slightly. Her nieces and nephew, Miss Teresa, Mrs. Bella, and Mr. Charles, they were always coming in, going. Miss Emily was fond of them, though she'd scold them something fierce if they stepped out of line. And then there's Mr. Tanyos, Bella's husband, foreign chap, but polite enough. Poirot's interest sharpened. They are here now. These relatives arrived yesterday, Mrs. Jenkins confirmed. Staying for the reading of the will. I expect they're in the morning room now. If you'd like to meet them. Poirot inclined his head. That would be most agreeable. The morning room was brighter than the drawing room, its windows overlooking the garden where Bob was currently chasing a squirrel. 4 figures turned as Poirot and Hastings entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness. Mrs. Jenkins made the introductions. Teresa Arundel, the elder niece, was a striking woman in her early 30s, with sleek dark hair and a poise that spoke of city sophistication. Her dress, a chic navy ensemble, contrasted with the room's faded grandeur. She offered a cool smile, her eyes assessing Poirot. Mr. Poirot, isn't it? I've heard of you, quite the reputation. Poirot bowed slightly. Mademoiselle, you are too kind. My reputation, it is merely the result of order and method. Bella Tanyos, the younger niece, was Teresa's opposite, mousy, with nervous hands and a plain frock that hung loosely on her frame. She clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting between Poirot and her husband, Jacob Tanyos, a dark-haired man, with a broad smile and an accent that hinted at Mediterranean origins. A pleasure, Mr. Poirot, Jacob said, shaking hands with a vigor that made Hastings wince. And Captain Hastings, yes. Welcome to Little Green House. Charles Arundel, the nephew, lounged in an armchair, his tie loosened and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was handsome in a rakish way, with tousled hair and a grin that suggested he found life perpetually amusing. So, you're the detective Aunt Emily wrote to, he said, blowing a smoke ring. Bit late, aren't you? She's been dead 2 months. Hastings bristled, but Poirot's smile remained serene. Monsieur Charles, the truth, it does not expire, and I am here to uncover it, with your assistance, Bean, sir. Teresa raised an eyebrow. Uncover what, exactly? Aunt Emily died of liver trouble. Dr. Granger said so. Surely there's no mystery here. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps with the letter from your aunt. It suggests otherwise. The incident of the dog's ball. It troubles me. Bella gasped softly, her handkerchief twisting in her hands. The ball. But that was an accident. Poor Bob didn't mean any harm. Jacob patted her arm. Now Bella, don't upset yourself. Mr. Poirot's just doing his job, asking questions. No one's blaming Bob. Charles snorted. Blame the dog, blame the stairs, blame the moon for all I care. Aunt Emily was old. Old people fall. End of story. Hastings, unable to contain himself, said, but the letter was delayed, sent weeks after it was written. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Teresa's gaze sharpened. Delayed. How do you know that? Poirot waved a hand. A small detail, mademoiselle, but one I intend to clarify. For now, let us enjoy this excellent tea and speak of happier things. Tell me, Monsieur Charles, you are a man of adventure, Nan. I hear talk of water speed records. Charles grinned, warming to the subject. Oh, I've had a go at it. Smashed a few records on the lake last summer. Nothing like the thrill of skimming over the water. Engine roaring costs a pretty penny, though. Teresa rolled her eyes. Which you were always asking Aunt Emily to provide. Charles shrugged, unperturbed. She could afford it. Besides, she liked backing a winner. Bella's voice, soft but firm, cut in. Aunt Emily didn't approve of gambling. Charles, she told you so often enough. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Poirot sipped his tea, his eyes moving from one face to another, noting the undercurrents of resentment and greed. The Arundels were a family bound by blood but divided by ambition, and Emily's fortune, rumored to be substantial, hung over them like a storm cloud. Mrs. Jenkins reappeared, breaking the moment. If you'll excuse me, I've lunch to prepare. Will you gentlemen be staying? Poirot nodded. With your permission, we would like to remain a few days, to better understand Miss Arundel's life and her death. Teresa frowned. Is that really necessary? The will's being read tomorrow. After that, we'll all be out of your hair. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The will, it is important, but the truth, it is more so. And I believe Bob, he has much to tell us. As if on cue, Bob scampered into the room, his ball in his mouth. He dropped it at Poirot's feet, tail wagging furiously. Hastings laughed, but Poirot knelt, picking up the ball and turning it over in his hands. It was ordinary, a simple rubber sphere, yet it held a significance he could not yet fully grasp. The family dispersed. Teresa to write letters, Charles to the pub, Bella and Jacob to their room, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone. Hastings stretched, glancing out at the garden. Well, Poirot, what do you make of them? Bit of a mixed bag, aren't they? Poirot set the ball on the table, his expression thoughtful. They are a family, mon ami, and like all families, they have secrets. The letter, the fall, the ball, these are pieces of a puzzle. And Bob, he is no mere pet. He is a witness, perhaps the only one who saw what truly happened. Hastings frowned. A witness, he's a dog. Poirot, he can't talk. Poirot's eyes gleamed in Nan. But he can show us. And we, Hastings, we must listen. The afternoon passed in exploration. Poirot, with Hastings trailing behind, wandered the grounds, noting the layout of the house and garden. Bob tagged along, occasionally darting off to chase a butterfly or dig at the base of a rosebush. Poirot paused by the sundial, running his fingers over its weathered surface. Time, he murmured. It is always time that betrays the guilty. They returned to the house as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. In the hall, Poirot lingered by the staircase, his eyes fixed on the scuff mark. He knelt again, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, saw nothing remarkable, but Poirot's face was grave. "Dinner will be simple," Mrs. Jenkins said, appearing from the kitchen. "But you're welcome to join the family in the dining room." The meal was a strained affair. Teresa, elegant but aloof, picked at her food, while Charles regaled the table with tales of his exploits, most of which sounded exaggerated. Bella was quiet, her eyes downcast, and Jacob filled the silence with hearty laughter and anecdotes about his travels. Poirot listened, his contributions minimal but pointed, each question probing a little deeper into the family's dynamics. After dinner, as the others retired, Poirot and Hastings lingered in the drawing room. Bob curled up by the fire, his ball tucked beneath his chin. Hastings yawned. "Long day, Poirot. Any closer to solving this thing?" Poirot gazed into the flames. "Closer, but the path is not yet clear." The fall was no accident. Hastings, the ball was placed, not dropped, and the lettered's delay was no mistake. Someone wished to keep Miss Arundel's fears from reaching me until it was too late. Hastings stared. "You mean murder?" Poirot's voice was soft but firm. "I mean, mon ami, that we are only at the beginning. And Bob, he will lead us to the truth." As if hearing his name, Bob lifted his head, his eyes meeting Poirot's. He rose, stretched, and trotted to the detective, dropping his ball once more at his feet. Poirot smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Patience, mon petit. We will find it, together." The night settled over Little Green House, the silence broken only by the creak of old wood and the distant bark of a fox. In his room, Poirot sat by the window, his notebook open, his pencil sketching a timeline. April 17th, the fall. May 1st, the letter written. June 28th, Emily's death. The pieces were there, but the picture was incomplete. He closed the notebook, his mind still turning, and whispered into the darkness, "The terrier's tale is not yet told." Chapter 3. Shadows of suspicion. The morning mist clung to Market Basing like a reluctant guest, shrouding the village in a gauzy veil that softened the edges of its quaint cottages and cobblestone lanes. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in his tailored overcoat and polished shoes, stepped out of the modest inn where he and Captain Hastings had taken lodging. His mustache twitched as he inhaled the damp air, his sharp eyes scanning the street. Hastings followed, his taller frame slightly hunched against the chill, his face betraying a mix of curiosity and mild irritation at the early hour. "Poirot, old chap, must we start so early?" Hastings ventured, stifling a yawn. "The village is hardly awake, and I dare say the suspects aren't plotting at dawn." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes glinting with that familiar spark of intellectual vigor. "Mon ami, the early hour is precisely when the world reveals its secrets. The milkman, the postboy, the baker, they see what others miss. And besides," he added, tapping his temple, "the little grey cells, they do not sleep." Their destination was the home of the Tripp sisters, Emily Arundel's eccentric neighbors, whose reputation for spiritualism had piqued Poirot's interest. The sisters' cottage, a charming if slightly dilapidated affair with ivy crawling up its walls, stood at the edge of the village. As they approached, the faint tinkle of wind chimes greeted them, mingling with the distant bark of a dog perhaps. Bob, Poirot mused, his mind briefly returning to the wire-haired terrier's curious behavior at Little Green House. The door creaked open before Poirot could knock, revealing Miss Isabel Tripp, the elder of the two sisters. Her wiry frame was draped in a flowing shawl of indeterminate color, and her eyes, bright and bird-like, darted between Poirot and Hastings. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. We sensed you would come," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of excitement and theatricality. "The spirits have been restless, you know." Hastings suppressed a chuckle, but Poirot bowed politely. "Mademoiselle Tripp, your sensitivity to the unseen is most intriguing. May we enter and discuss the events surrounding Miss Arundel's passing?" Isabel ushered them into a parlor that seemed to belong to another era. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and incense, and every surface was cluttered with curiosities, crystal balls, tarot cards, and faded photographs of stern-faced ancestors. Miss Julia Tripp, the younger sister, sat by a small table, her hands clasped around a steaming cup of tea. Her round face lit up at their arrival, though her gaze held a hint of wariness. "Tea, gentlemen," Julia offered, gesturing to a chipped porcelain pot. "It's our own blend, infused with herbs to calm the spirit." Poirot accepted a cup with a nod, though Hastings declined. his skepticism barely concealed. As they settled into creaking armchairs, Poirot steered the conversation with his usual finesse. "Mademoiselle, I understand you were close to Miss Arundel. Perhaps you can share what you observed in the days before her departure." Isabelle leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, there was something unnatural about it all. The night she died, June 28th, was it not? We saw a green mist hovering near Little Green House. A spectral presence, I tell you. It drifted across the lawn, right by her window." Hastings coughed, masking a laugh, but Poirot's expression remained grave. "A green mist, you say? Most fascinating. And this phenomenon, it appeared only that night?" Julia nodded vigorously, her curls bobbing. "Only then. We held a séance the next evening, and Emily's spirit was most distressed. She spoke of betrayal, of a shadow in her house. Oh, it was chilling." Poirot's fingers traced the rim of his teacup, his mind sifting through their words. The Tripp sisters' penchant for the supernatural was evident, but he suspected that visions might stem from more earthly sources, perhaps an overheard conversation or a glimpse of something they couldn't fully explain. "And this shadow," he pressed gently, "did it take a form? A person, perhaps?" The sisters exchanged a glance, their enthusiasm faltering. "Not precisely," Isabelle admitted, "but we felt a presence, dark and heavy. Emily trusted many, you see, her family. They were not all kind." Hastings, unable to resist, interjected. "Surely you don't believe in this spirit nonsense, Poirot? It's all a bit theatrical, isn't it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mon ami, the theater of the mind often conceals truth. Mademoiselle, I thank you for your insights. May we call again if further questions arise?" As they left the cottage, Hastings shook his head. "Green mists and spirits. I say, Poirot, those two are batty as a belfry. You can't possibly take them seriously." Poirot paused on the path, his gloved hand adjusting his hat. "Hastings, the eccentric often see what the conventional overlook. Their story of a green mist may be embellished, but it suggests they witnessed something unusual that night. A light, perhaps, or a figure moving in the dark. We must not dismiss them yet." Their next stop was Little Green House, where they hoped to speak with Charles Arundel, Emily's nephew. The estate loomed ahead, its Georgian facade imposing yet weathered, as if bearing the weight of its secrets. Bob the terrier bounded out to greet them, his tail wagging furiously as he dropped a well-chewed ball at Hastings' feet. "Jolly little fellow, aren't you?" Hastings said, tossing the ball across the lawn. Bob tore after it, his yip echoing in the still air. Poirot watched, his eyes narrowing as he noted the dog's energy and apparent lack of guilt. "This dog," he murmured, "he is no mere pet. He is a witness." Inside they found Charles lounging in the drawing-room, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His boyish charm was undeniable. Tousled hair, a rakish grin, but his eyes held a restless edge. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he drawled, rising lazily. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Come to admire Aunt Emily's antiques." Poirot, it smiled, his demeanor disarming. "Monsieur Arundel, I am merely seeking to understand your aunt's final days." "You were fond of her, Nan?" Charles shrugged, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Fond enough. She was a tough old bird, but she had a soft spot for me. Always said I reminded her of her brother, my father. You know, a bit of a rogue." He was. Hastings, warming to Charles's manner, nodded. "I hear you're quite the adventurer yourself. Water speed records, isn't it?" Charles' grin widened. "Trying to break a few, yes. Got a boat down at the coast, sleek as a dolphin, fast as the devil. Costs a pretty penny, mind you, but life's too short for slow." Poirot's gaze sharpened, though his tone remained light. "And your aunt, she supported these ambitions?" Charles laughed, a touch too loudly. "Aunt Emily, she wasn't one for throwing money about. Said I'd fritter it away. But she'd come around, you know, always did." The conversation shifted to Emily's fall, and Charles' nonchalance wavered. "That blasted dog's ball," he said, shaking his head. "Poor Bob got the blame, but he's harmless. Aunt Emily was just unsteady, that's all." Poirot nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The housekeeper had mentioned seeing Charles near Little Green House the evening before. Emily's accidental detail Charles hadn't volunteered. "You, monsieur, where were you the night of the fall?" Poirot asked, his voice deceptively casual. Charles stubbed out his cigarette, his movements deliberate. "Me? Oh, down at the pub. I expect the Red Lion. Ask anyone, they'll tell you I was there, charming the barmaid." Hastings chuckled, but Poirot's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Most helpful, monsieur. We shall speak again, I am sure." As they stepped back into the garden, a groundskeeper approached, his weathered face etched with hesitation. "Beg pardon, sir," he said, addressing Poirot. "I overheard you talking about Mr. Charles. Thought you should know I saw him by the house that evening, before Miss Emily fell, near the side door. He was looking, well, sneaky, if you'll forgive me." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced. "Merci, monsieur. Your observation is most valuable. You saw nothing else?" The groundskeeper shook his head. "Just him, sir. Didn't think much of it then, but now, well, it's queer, ain't it?" As the man shuffled away, Hastings frowned. "Charles, sneaking about, I say, Poirot. He's a bit of a scamp, but murder, that's a stretch. Poirot adjusted his gloves, his gaze distant. Mon ami, the scamp is often the one who surprises us most. Charles Arundel has charm, yes, but charm can mask many things. We must learn more. The afternoon brought them back to the village, where Poirot insisted on visiting the Red Lion to verify Charles' alibi. The pub was a cozy affair, its low beams and crackling fire inviting despite the grim purpose of their visit. The barmaid, a rosy-cheeked young woman named Annie, confirmed Charles' presence on the evening in question, but her account was vague. He was here, all right, she said, polishing a glass. In and out, though, kept stepping outside, said he needed air. Poirot thanked her, his mind cataloguing the discrepancy. Charles had implied he'd spent the entire evening at the pub, yet Annie's words suggested otherwise. As they left, Hastings remarked, "Sounds like Charles wasn't as anchored to that pub as he claims, but why lie about it?" Poirot's response was cryptic. "Because, Hastings, the truth is inconvenient. Someone ensured that letter from Miss Arundel was delayed. Someone wished her fall to go unquestioned, and someone, perhaps, wished her dead." Back at the inn, Poirot spread a notebook on the table, his pencil sketching a timeline of events. Emily's letter, dated May 1st, had reached him only after her death on June 28th. The fall, the will, the dog's ball, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. His pencil paused as he traced the date of the fall, his voice barely a whisper. Someone ensured that letter was delayed, and that someone, they are here, in Market Basing. The day waned, and the mist thickened, casting long shadows across the village. Poirot closed his notebook, his expression resolute. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we dig deeper. The shadows of suspicion grow longer, and the truth they cannot hide forever." Hastings nodded, though his mind lingered on Charles' easy grin and the Tripp sisters' wild tales. "I hope you're right, Poirot. This place feels like it's full of ghosts." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Ghosts, mon ami, none only. The living play these games, and we shall find them out." The chapter drew to a close with Poirot's words hanging in the air, a promise of revelations to come. The Tripp sisters' eerie claims, Charles' questionable alibi, and the groundskeeper's sighting had woven a tapestry of doubt, each thread pulling the investigation tighter. Bob's playful presence lingered in Poirot's thoughts, a silent witness to the secrets of Little Green House. The stage was set, the players revealed, and the mystery deepened, leaving the promise of truth just beyond the mist. Chapter 4. The Will's Whisper. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing-room of Little Green House, his small, neat figure perched on the edge of a velvet-upholstered chair. The room was a study in faded grandeur. Heavy damask curtains framed tall windows, their tassels frayed from years of sunlight. A mahogany sideboard gleamed with polish but bore faint scratches, and a portrait of a stern-looking Arundel ancestor glowered from above the fireplace. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and old books, mingling with the tension that hung over the gathered company. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful shadow, stood near the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the late afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains. His eyes darted between the room's occupants, his mind clearly wrestling with the puzzle that Poirot seemed to unravel with infuriating ease. The revelation of Emily Arundel's altered will had stirred the household like a stone cast into a still pond. The document, drafted mere days after her near-fatal fall down the stairs, had shifted her considerable fortune, rumored to be in the tens of thousands of pounds, away from her blood relatives to her companion, Miss Wilhelmina Lawson. The news had reached Poirot through a discreet inquiry with Emily's solicitor, Mr. Purvis, whose offices in Market Basing were as orderly as Poirot's own mind. The solicitor, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, had confirmed the change in a hushed tone, as if the walls themselves might betray the secret. Emily's signature, firm despite her age, had been witnessed by 2 servants, both of whom had since left the household under vague circumstances. Poirot's fingers steepled before him, his green eyes glinting as he surveyed the room. The S. Arundel, Bella Tanios, Charles Arundel, and, by extension, Bella's husband, Dr. Jacob Tanios, sat in varying states of discomfort. Teresa, with her sleek bob and Parisian elegance, reclined on a chaise longue, her cigarette holder dangling lazily between her fingers. Her dark eyes flicked toward Poirot, sharp and guarded, as if weighing whether he was an ally or a threat. Bella, by contrast, sat rigidly on a straight-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her plain wool dress a stark contrast to Teresa's silk. Charles lounged near the fireplace, his handsome face set in a practiced smirk, though his fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on the mantel. Jacob was absent, his medical practice in London demanding his attention, or so Bella had explained in a faltering voice. Miss Lawson, the unexpected beneficiary, hovered near the tea tray, her hands fluttering like startled birds as she poured Earl Grey into delicate porcelain cups. Her round face, framed by wispy grey curls, was flushed with anxiety, and her eyes darted toward Poirot with a mixture of awe and fear. She was not a woman accustomed to scrutiny, and Poirot's presence seemed to unsettle her more than the glares of the disinherited family. Monsieur Poirot, Teresa said, her voice smooth as velvet but edged with impatience. You've spoken with Mr. Purvis, I presume. This change in Aunt Emily's will is absurd. She was not herself after that dreadful fall. Surely you see that. Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching slightly. Mademoiselle, the mind of Hercule Poirot is not so easily swayed by assumptions. The will, it is legal. We signed, witnessed, and registered. Yet the timing, it intrigues me. A fall, a change of heart, a fortune redirected. These are not mere coincidences. I think Hastings, unable to resist, interjected. From his post by the window it does seem odd, doesn't it? I mean, Emily was a sharp old bird. From what I gather, why would she suddenly cut out her family for— He caught himself, glancing at Miss Lawson, who froze mid-pour, her cheeks reddening. Well, for someone outside the family. Miss Lawson set the teapot down with a clatter. I never asked for anything, Captain Hastings. Miss Arundel was so kind, so generous. I was as shocked as anyone when Mr. Purvis told me. Poirot's eyes softened, but only slightly. Mademoiselle Lawson, you were her companion for how long? 3 years, Nan. You knew her habits, her thoughts, perhaps better than these relatives who visited but seldom. Tell me, did she speak of her intentions before the fall? Miss Lawson's hands twisted in her apron. She did mention once or twice that she worried about the family. Their spending, you know. Teresa's trips to Monte Carlo, Charles's investments. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And Bella's children, always needing more for their schooling. Teresa's cigarette holder paused mid-air, her eyes narrowing. Really, Wilhelmina, airing our laundry to a stranger. Aunt Emily was fond of you. Yes, but she wasn't a fool. Someone must have influenced her or frightened her, Poirot murmured, almost to himself. He rose, his small frame commanding the room despite its size. The fall, it was no accident, I suspect. The ball of the little dog Bob, charming, wee, but convenient. A trap perhaps set by one who knew the household's rhythms. Charles laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. A trap? Come now, Poirot, you're spinning tales. Aunt Emily tripped over Bob's ball. Clumsy, tragic, but hardly a conspiracy. Poirot's gaze fixed on Charles, unblinking. Monsieur, the ball was found at the top of the stairs. Yet Bob, he does not carry his ball there. He plays in the hall, the garden, not. Someone placed it, and someone ensured Mademoiselle Arundel's fall was encouraged. A silence fell, heavy as the dust motes drifting in the sunlight. Bella's hands tightened in her lap, her knuckles whitening. You can't mean murder. Her voice was barely audible, her eyes wide with fear. Not murder, perhaps at the fall, Poirot said, his tone measured, but an attempt, a warning. And then, the will changes. The question is, who benefits, and who knew? Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his admiration for Teresa's poise warring with Poirot's insinuations. But Poirot, Miss Lawson seems harmless enough. Surely she didn't harmless. Teresa cut in, her voice sharp. She was always hovering, listening at doors. Aunt Emily was frail, impressionable. Who's to say Wilhelmina didn't whisper poison in her ear? Miss Lawson gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Teresa, how could you? I loved Miss Arundel. I'd never enough, Poirot said, his voice quiet but firm. He crossed to the sideboard where a silver letter opener lay slightly askew, its blade catching the light. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands, his expression unreadable. This, it is curious. It does not belong here, I think. The desk in the study, it has a place for such a tool, Nan. Yet here it is, misplaced. Hastings frowned, puzzled. A letter. What's that got to do with anything? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Everything, mon ami, is a clue when one knows where to look. The will, the fall, the letter opener. They are threads in a tapestry. And the little dog Bob he guards. The pattern. The room seemed to hold its breath. Teresa stubbed out her cigarette, her movements deliberate. Charles's smirk faltered, and Bella's eyes darted toward the door, as if longing to flee. Miss Lawson, trembling, sank into a chair, her teacup rattling in its saucer. Poirot set the letter opener down with care. I shall return tomorrow. Mies Amos, there is much to consider. The will, it whispers, but the truth it shouts, if one listens. He turned to Hastings, his eyes gleaming. Come, Hastings, we must walk with Bob. He has much to teach us. As they stepped into the hall, the wire-haired terrier bounded forward, his ball clutched in his jaws. He dropped it at Poirot's feet, tail wagging furiously. Poirot bent down, patting the dog's head. Oui, mon petit, you see more than they know. The afternoon light was fading as they left Little Green House, the gravel crunching under their feet. Hastings glanced back at the imposing facade, its windows like eyes watching their departure. Poirot, do you really think the letter opener means something, or are you just stirring the pot? Poirot chuckled softly. The pot, it must be stirred, Hastings, to bring the truth to the surface. The letter opener, it is a small thing, but small things they betray the careless hand. Tomorrow, we shall see more clearly. They walked toward the village, Bob trotting ahead, his ball bouncing in the grass. The mystery of Emily Arundel's will hung over them, a shadow lengthening, with the setting sun. Poirot's mind, however, was already weaving the threads together. the will's whisper guiding him toward the truth, with Bob, the dumb witness, as his unlikely ally. The village of Market Basing was quiet as they reached the inn where they were staying, the King's Arms, a quaint establishment with ivy clinging to its stone walls. Over a simple supper of roast lamb and potatoes, Hastings pressed Poirot for more. "You're being awfully cryptic, old chap. That letter opener, why make such a fuss over it?" Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes half closed. "The letter opener, Hastings, it is out of place. In a household as orderly as Little Green, such a thing is not an accident. It was moved, perhaps in haste, perhaps to conceal. And the will, why change it so suddenly? Why exclude the family who, though flawed, were her blood?" Hastings leaned back, his brow furrowed. "You think someone pressured her? Miss Lawson, maybe. She's the one who benefits." Poirot shook his head. "Nan, mon ami, Miss Lawson, she is nervous, but not cunning. Her surprise at the will, it is genuine, I think. No, the hand that moved the letter opener, that placed the ball, that perhaps delayed the letter, it is another. We must look to motive, to opportunity, and to the little dog who sees all but speaks not." Hastings grinned despite himself. "You're fond of that terrier, aren't you?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "He is a witness most reliable, Hastings. His eyes, they miss nothing. Tomorrow we shall observe him closely. The will is the heart of this puzzle, but the dog, he guards the key." The night settled over Market Basing, the inn's fire crackling softly as Poirot and Hastings retired. In the darkness, Little Green House stood silent, its secrets locked within its walls, secrets that Poirot, with his grey cells and his canine ally, was determined to uncover. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the village stirring with the clatter of milk cans and the chatter of early risers. Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, led Hastings back to Little Green House, where Bob greeted them with a joyous bark. The terrier's energy was infectious, and even Poirot's usual reserve softened as he tossed the ball for Bob to chase across the lawn. Their first task was to speak again with Miss Lawson, who was found in the conservatory, tending to a wilting fern. Her hands shook as she clipped a browning leaf, and her eyes darted toward Poirot with trepidation. "Monsieur Poirot, have you found anything about Miss Arundel's death?" Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, tell me of the night of the fall. You were here, you heard nothing, saw nothing." Miss Lawson's fingers fumbled with the shears. "I was in my room, reading. I heard a cry, and then the servant found her at the bottom of the stairs. The ball, Bob's ball, was there. I thought, we all thought it was an accident." "And the letter opener," Poirot said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "It is usually in the study, now, yet I found it in the drawing room. Do you move it often?" Miss Lawson blinked, startled. "The letter opener? No, I don't think so. The maids, perhaps. They clean, they move things." Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he was far from convinced. He thanked her, and led Hastings to the study, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy oak desk. The letter opener's usual place was a small leather tray, empty now. Poirot examined the desk, his fingers tracing the edges of drawers, his eyes scanning for anything amiss. "Hastings," he said, "observe the lock on this drawer. It is scratched ever so slightly. Someone has tampered with it, perhaps to retrieve something or to hide it." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "A letter, maybe like the one Emily sent you." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or perhaps something that connects the will to the fall. We must speak to the servants who witnessed the will. Their departure, it is too convenient. The morning, passed in a flurry of interviews. The former cook, Mrs. Jenkins, now working at a bakery in the village, recalled signing the will but admitted she hadn't read it. Miss Arundel was kind but firm, she said, wiping flour from her hands. She said it was important, that's all. The second witness, a young maid named Ellen, had moved to a neighboring town but was tracked down by Poirot's persistent inquiries. She was more forthcoming, her eyes wide with nervousness. Miss Lawson was there when we signed. She said she seemed surprised, like she didn't expect it. Poirot's interest sharpened. "Surprised, you say? And Miss Arundel? How did she seem?" "Determined," Ellen said, "but tired, like she was carrying a weight." By midday, Poirot and Hastings returned to Little Green House, where the family had gathered for lunch. The atmosphere was strained, with Teresa picking at her food, Charles joking too loudly, and Bella murmuring apologies for Jacob's absence. Poirot watched them all, his silence more unsettling than any question. After lunch, he requested a tour of the upstairs, where the fateful staircase stood. Bob, ever eager, bounded ahead, his ball clutched tightly. The top of the stairs paused, his eyes tracing the polished wood, the faint mark where the ball had supposedly caused Emily's fall. He knelt, his fingers brushing the spot, then stood abruptly. "Hastings," he said, "fetch Bob's ball. Let us test a theory." Hastings, puzzled but obedient, tossed the ball gently. It rolled a few inches and stopped, caught by the carpets. "Edge, it doesn't roll far," Hastings said, frowning. "How could it have caused a fall?" "Precisement," Poirot said. "It did not. The ball was placed, Hastings, to create the illusion of an accident, And the letter opener, misplaced in the drawing room, it tells us someone was Kelisura hurried. The day wore on, with Poirot piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. He spoke again with Teresa, whose charm masked a steely determination. Aunt Emily was old-fashioned, she said, lighting another cigarette. She didn't understand modern life, but to leave everything to Wilhelmina, it's madness. And you, Mademoiselle Poirot said, you needed her money, perhaps, for your travels. Teresa's eyes flashed. I manage, Monsieur Poirot. I don't need to kill for it. Charles, when questioned, was equally evasive, his charm slipping under Poirot's scrutiny. Look, I liked Aunt Emily, he said, running a hand through his hair. Sure, I asked for a loan now and then, who doesn't, but I didn't push her down any stairs. Bella, tearful and anxious, pleaded her case last. We needed help for the children, she said, her voice breaking. Jacob's practice isn't what it was, but I'd never hurt Aunt Emily. Never. Poirot listened, his face impassive, but his mind was racing. The letter opener, the tampered drawer, the will's sudden change all pointed to a careful plan. Disrupted by Emily's unexpected letter to Poirot, and Bob, the terrier, remained the silent witness, his playful demeanor hiding a truth Poirot was determined to uncover. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings stood in the garden watching Bob chase his ball across the lawn. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Poirot's voice was low, almost a whisper. The will, Hastings, it is the heart of this puzzle, but the dog, he guards the key. Hastings, exasperated, threw up his hands. Poirot, you keep saying that, what does it mean? Poirot smiled, his eyes fixed on Bob. It means, mon ami, that the truth is close. Tomorrow, we shall stir the pot once more. And then, perhaps, the whisper of the will shall become a shout. They returned to the inn, the mystery unresolved but tantalizingly close to revelation. Little green house loomed behind them, its secrets, waiting with Bob's sharp eyes and Poirot's sharper mind poised to unravel them. Chapter 5. The Dog's Domain. Hercule Poirot stood in the manicured garden of Little Greenhouse, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dukest grass. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and the air carried the faint scent of roses mingled with the earthiness of freshly turned soil. Beside him, Captain Hastings adjusted his tie, his gaze drifting to the sprawling estate, its ivy-clad walls exuding an air of timeless dignity. But Poirot's attention was fixed on a small, wiry figure darting across the grass. Bob, the wire-haired terrier, Emily Arundel's loyal companion. The dog's black and white coat gleamed as he chased a rubber ball, his tail wagging with unbridled enthusiasm. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign that his gray cells were already at work. Observe, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice low but precise. How this little one moves with such purpose. The ballet is not merely a toy, it is a key, perhaps, to the mystery of Mademoiselle Arundel's fall. Hastings chuckled, his eyes following Bob's playful leaps. You're reading too much into it, old chap. He's just a dog, after all, loves his ball, doesn't he? Poirot's green eyes narrowed, a faint smile playing on his lips. Mon ami, you underestimate the canine mind. Bob, he sees what we do not. He knows what we must discover. The pair had arrived at Little Greenhouse to deepen their investigation into Emily Arundel's death, spurred by the cryptic, delayed letter Poirot had received. The official report deemed her passing natural, a consequence of age and a weak liver. But the letter's mention of the incident of the dog's ball and its 2-month delay gnawed at Poirot's sense of order. Something was amiss, and the orderly Belgian detective thrived on such puzzles. Today their focus was Bob and the staircase where Emily had fallen, an accident initially blamed on the terrier's toy. They approached the house, its heavy oak door creaking as the housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, ushered them inside. The interior was a study in faded grandeur, polished wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and a faint mustiness that clung to the air. Mrs. Jenkins, a stout woman with a perpetually furrowed brow, led them to the drawing-room, where a fire crackled despite the warmth of the June morning. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice tinged with unease. I'll fetch tea. The family's about, but they're, well, you'll see. Not all of Mr. Pleased you're poking around. Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene. Merci, Madame Jenkins. We shall be most discreet. As she bustled off, Hastings leaned closer. Discreet you. That'll be the day. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Discretion, my friend, is the art of asking questions without seeming to. Ask them now. Let us observe. Their first task was to examine the staircase, a grand curving structure of dark oak that dominated the entrance hall. Its polished steps gleamed, but Poirot's gaze was drawn to a faint scuff mark on the third step from the top. He knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the mark, his face a mask of concentration. Double quotes, Hastings. Regard us, he said, pointing to the scuff. This marked it is not natural. It is too precise, too deliberate. Something was placed here, perhaps to ensure a fall. Hastings squinted, unconvinced. Could be anything, Poirot. A clumsy foot, a dropped candlestick. No, no, Poirot interrupted, rising with a fluid motion. A candlestick does not leave such a mark. This is the work of intent. And Bob's ball, it was found at the bottom of the stairs. Before Hastings could reply, Bob bounded into the hall, his ball clutched in his jaws. The terrier dropped it at Poirot's feet, his bright eyes fixed on the detective. Poirot crouched again, patting Bob's head with a gentleness that surprised Hastings' bon chien. Poirot murmured, "You will tell us, will you not, what happened that night?" Hastings laughed. "You're talking to the dog now. Really, Poirot, this is a bit much," but Poirot was undeterred. He picked up the ball, examining its worn surface. "This ball, it is not merely a plaything. It was placed, Hastings, to cause Mademoiselle Arundel's fall, but by whom and why?" Their musings were interrupted by the arrival of Bella Tagnos, Emily's timid niece, who entered the hall with a hesitant step. Her plain dress and nervous demeanor contrasted sharply with the elegance of her sister Teresa, whom they'd met the previous day. Bella's eyes darted to Bob, then to Poirot, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Mr. Poirot," she said softly, "I heard you were asking about Aunt Emily's accident." "It was an accident, wasn't it? The doctor said so." Poirot's smile was reassuring, almost paternal. "Mademoiselle Bella, we seek only the truth. Tell me, you were here often. Did you notice anything unusual about Bob's habits, perhaps with his ball?" Bella hesitated, her gaze flickering to the staircase. "Bob's always playing with that ball. He drops it everywhere. But Aunt Emily was careful. She wouldn't have tripped, not like that." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her face, "and yet she fell. Tell me, what was her manner in the days before the accident?" Bella's hands tightened on the handkerchief. "She was worried. Kept talking about money, about the family. Said she didn't trust everyone. I thought she was just tired. But now," her voice trailed off, and she looked away, her cheeks flushing. Hastings, ever empathetic, stepped forward. "It must be hard, losing her so suddenly. Did she mention anything specific? A name, perhaps?" Bella shook her head, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "No, nothing like that. Just, she said she'd make things right. I didn't know what she meant." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, a silent agreement that Bella knew more than she was saying, before they could press further. Mrs. Jenkins returned with a tray of tea and biscuits, her presence halting the conversation that they sipped tea in the drawing room. Poirot steered the discussion to the family's financial state. Bella admitted her husband Jacob struggled with his medical practice in Smyrna, and they relied on Emily's generosity. Her words were laced with a quiet desperation, and Poirot noted the way her fingers trembled as she spoke of debts. "Money," Poirot said later as he and Hastings strolled the garden. "It is the pulse of this mystery. Mademoiselle Bella, she is afraid, but not only for herself. There is something she protects." Hastings frowned. "You think she's hiding something? She seems so fragile." "Fragile, oui, but fragility can mask strength," Poirot replied. "We must watch her closely." Their next stop was the village chemist, a small shop with shelves lined with bottles and jars. The chemist, Mr. Hargreaves, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them with a nod. Poirot, adopting the guise of a biographer researching Emily's life, inquired about her purchases. Miss Hargreaves scratched his chin. "She came in a few weeks before her fall, bought some chloral hydrate, said it was for sleeping troubles. Nothing unusual, mind, but she seemed preoccupied." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Chloral hydrate, you say, and how much did she purchase?" "A small bottle, enough for a month if taken sparingly." Hargreaves replied. "I warned her about the dosage. She was particular, you know, didn't like mistakes." As they left the shop, Hastings' brow furrowed. "Chloral hydrate. That's a sedative, isn't it? Could it be connected to her death?" Poirot's expression was grave. "It is possible. Mon ami, sedative, in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon. We must learn if Mademoiselle Arundel took a tour, if it was given to her." Back at Little Greenhouse, Poirot's attention returned to Bob. The terrier, as if sensing his importance, led them to the staircase again, his nose sniffing at the third step. Poirot knelt, his fingers brushing the wood, and discovered a faint residue, barely visible to the naked eye. He scraped it into a small envelope, his movements precise. "Hastings, this residue, it may be nothing or it may be everything," he said. "We shall have it analyzed." The day waned, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, Poirot and Hastings lingered in the garden, watching Bob chase his ball across the lawn. The terrier's energy was infectious, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The village buzzed with gossip, much of it centered on the Arundel family's greed. A groundskeeper had mentioned seeing Charles, Emily's nephew, loitering near the house before the fall, his manner furtive. Teresa, the elegant niece, was rumored to have expensive tastes, her London lifestyle funded by Emily's generosity, and Bella, so quiet and unassuming, carried the weight of her husband's failures. As they prepared to leave, Bob trotted to a corner of the drawing room, his nose pressed against a locked drawer in Emily's desk. He barked sharply, his tail rigid, and Poirot's eyes lit up. "Mon petit ami," he said, crossing to the drawer, "you show us the way, do you not?" Hastings joined him, peering at the drawer. "Locked, think it's important." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Everything is important, Hastings, until it is not. We shall return tomorrow, with permission to open this drawer, but for now, let us retire. The grey cells, they need rest to unravel this tangle. They left Little Green House under a starlit sky, the mystery deepening with each step. Bob's fixation on the staircase and the locked drawer, the chemist's revelation about chloral hydrate, and Bella's nervous admissions wove a web of suspicion. Poirot's hypothesis that the ball was deliberately placed to cause Emily's fall gained traction. But the question of who and why remained elusive. As they walked therein, Bob's bark echoed in the distance, a reminder that the dumb witness held secrets yet to be uncovered. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings returned to Little Green House, armed with fresh determination. Mrs. Jenkins, though reluctant, allowed them access to Emily's study, where the locked drawer awaited. Poirot, with a borrowed key from the housekeeper, opened it to reveal a collection of letters, receipts, and a small notebook. The notebook, its pages filled with Emily's precise handwriting, detailed her concerns about her family's intentions. One entry, dated a week before her fall, read, "I fear one of them means me harm. The ball on the stair was no accident. I must act." Hastings' eyes widened. Good Lord, Poirot, she knew. She suspected someone was after her. Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the words, but she did not act in time. Or perhaps she did, and that is why she died. The letters included correspondence with her solicitor, confirming the will's change to favor Miss Lawson, Emily's companion. A receipt for the chloral hydrate was tucked among the papers, its date aligning with Hargreaves' account. But one letter, half-torn and crumpled, caught Poirot's eye. It was addressed to Emily from an unknown sender, its tone cryptic. "You must reconsider, or there will be consequences." Poirot's moustache quivered. "This, Hastings, is a thread we must follow. Who sent this warning? And why was it hidden?" Their investigation took them to the village pub, where locals shared tales of the Arundel family's strained dynamics. An old farmer, nursing a pint, spoke of Charles' gambling debts and Teresa's rumored affair with a London financier. Bella, he claimed, had once been seen arguing with Emily in the garden, her voice raised in rare defiance. Poirot listened, his expression unreadable, storing each tidbit in his mental archive that as the day progressed. Poirot's low-profile approach posing as a biographer yielded more clues. A shopkeeper recalled selling Emily a new lock for her desk, suggesting she feared tampering. A postman mentioned a letter that never reached its destination, possibly the one Poirot had received 2 months late. Each piece of gossip, each small detail, fueled Poirot's growing certainty that Emily's death was no accident. Back at Little Green House, Poirot requested a private moment with Bob. The terrier, sensing the detective's focus, led him once more to the staircase. His nose pressed to the third step. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, and discovered a tiny splinter of wood, its edge coated with a waxy substance. He pocketed it, his mind racing. "Hastings," he said, rising, "this wax, it is not from a candle. It is from a seal perhaps, or a substance used to secure the ball in place. We are close, mon ami, very close." The afternoon brought a visit from Miss Lawson, Emily's companion, whose nervous demeanor had intensified. She fidgeted as Poirot questioned her about the night of the fall, her answers vague and contradictory. She claimed to have been asleep, yet mentioned hearing Bob bark, a detail she hadn't shared before. And this barking, Poirot pressed. It was unusual. What did it tell you? Miss Lawson's eyes darted to the floor. I thought he was just restless. Bob's always barking at something." Poirot's smile was thin. "And yet, you did not check." A devoted companion, hearing her mistress's dog in distress, does nothing. Miss Lawson flushed, her hands wringing. "I was tired, Mr. Poirot. I didn't think Nan." Poirot cut in, his voice soft but sharp. "You thought, mademoiselle, but you did not act. Or perhaps you acted in ways we have yet to uncover." The interview left Hastings uneasy, his loyalty torn between Poirot's suspicions and Miss Lawson's apparent sincerity. As they left the study, Poirot paused by the staircase, his gaze lingering on the scuff mark. Bob, ever vigilant, dropped his ball at Poirot's feet, his eyes bright with expectation. "You see, Hastings," Poirot said, picking up the ball. "Bob, he does not lie. He does not scheme. He simply knows. And soon, we shall know too." The day ended with Poirot and Hastings seated in the inn's parlor. A map of Little Green House spread before them. Poirot sketched a timeline, his pencil marking key events: Emily's purchase of chloral hydrate, the fall, the will's change, the delayed letter. Each point was a thread in the tapestry of deceit, and Poirot's mind wove them together with relentless precision. As the firelight danced across the room, Bob's image lingered in Poirot's thoughts. The terrier's fixation on the stair, his barking at the locked drawer, his unwavering loyalty to Emily, these were not mere quirks, they were clues. Silent testimony to a crime Poirot was determined to unravel. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice a quiet murmur, "tomorrow, we shall open that drawer again. And Bob, our dumb witness, he shall lead us to the truth." The chapter closed with Poirot staring into the fire, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The mystery of Emily Arundel's death was no longer a vague suspicion but a tangible puzzle. Its pieces scattered across Little Green House, Bob's roll, the chloral hydrate, the tampered letter all pointed to a deliberate act, a murder disguised as an accident. And as the stars gleamed above Market Basing, Poirot's resolve burned brighter, a beacon in the gathering darkness. Chapter 6. The delayed dispatch. Hercule Poirot stood in the soft morning light filtering through the lace curtains of Little Green House, his gloved fingers delicately holding the envelope that had sparked this peculiar investigation. The letter, penned by the late Miss Emily Arundel, was a relic of her final days. Its postmark dated April 17th, yet it had only reached him on June 28th, 2 days after her death. The delay gnawed at his orderly mind, a discordant note in the symphony of facts he was assembling. He turned the envelope over, noting the faint smudge on its wax seal, a detail that whispered of interference. "Mon ami Poirot," said, glancing at Captain Hastings, who was sipping tea by the fireplace, "this letter, it is not merely late, it is a prisoner, held captive by design. We must liberate its secrets." Hastings set down his cup, his brow furrowing. "You think someone deliberately delayed it, but why? Emily was already dead when it arrived." "Precisement," Poirot murmured, his eyes gleaming. "The delay is the key. It hides the moment of intent, the moment when someone sought to silence Mademoiselle Arundel's voice. We shall visit the post office in Market Basing. There we may find the hand that held this letter too long." The duo set out, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path leading from Little Green House to the village square. Market Basing was a postcard of rural England, its cobblestone streets lined with ivy-clad cottages and shops adorned with hanging baskets of geraniums. The post office, a squat brick building with a faded sign, stood at the corner of High Street. Inside, the air smelled of ink and old paper, and a single clerk, a young man with nervous hands, stood behind the counter. Poirot approached with his most disarming smile. "Bonjour, monsieur. I am Hercule Poirot, a visitor to your charming village. I have a small matter concerning a letter, posted some months ago. Might I speak with someone familiar with such things?" The clerk, whose nameplate read Thomas Reed, blinked rapidly. "That'd be me, sir. I handle most of the post here. What's the trouble?" Poirot produced the envelope, holding it as if it were a rare artifact. "This letter, posted on April 17th, arrived in London only on June 28th. Such a delay is unusual, Nan. Perhaps you recall it." Reed's eyes darted to the envelope, and a flush crept up his neck. "April, you say? We've had a few mix-ups, sir. The post can get hectic, what with the spring fairs and all. Let me check the ledger." He retreated to a back room, leaving Poirot and Hastings to exchange glances. Hastings leaned in. He seemed rattled. "Poirot, think he's hiding something." "Patience, Hastings," Poirot replied, tapping his mustache. "The guilty, they betray themselves with the smallest gestures. Observe, and we shall see." Reed returned with a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and curling. He flipped through it, his fingers trembling slightly. "Here's April 17th, yes, a batch of letters went out that day. But, oh dear, there was an incident. A bag of mail got misfiled, sent to the wrong sorting office in Basingstoke. Didn't turn up till June." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Misfiled, you say? How does such a thing occur?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Well, sir, it's rare, but it happens. Someone, maybe me, maybe old Mr. Grayson, who helps out, put the bag in the wrong pile. It was a busy day. We had a visitor too, asking about postage rates, kept me chatting for ages." "A visitor?" Poirot's voice was soft, but his gaze was piercing. "Describe this person, if you please." Reed hesitated, wiping his brow. "A man, sir. Tall, dark hair, wore a grey coat, had a bit of an accent, maybe foreign, said he was passing through, needed stamps for a parcel to London." Hastings stifled a gasp, but Poirot's expression remained serene. "And this man, he was here when the bag was I suppose so," Reed stammered. "I didn't think much of it at the time." Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, though his mind was racing. "Merci, Monsieur Reed. You have been most helpful. One final question. This bag, where was it?" "Found in June. In the Basingstoke office, sir. Someone noticed it behind a cabinet." "Pure chance." "Really, chance," Poirot echoed, his tone skeptical. Perhaps, we shall trouble you no further." As they stepped into the crisp morning air, Hastings could contain himself no longer. "Poirot, that description, could it be Jacob Tanios? Bella's husband has dark hair, and his Greek accent might fit. But why would he meddle with the post?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing his friend. "Do not leap to conclusions, Hastings. The grey coat, the accent, these are threads, not the tapestry. We must weave them carefully. Let us return to Little Green House. There is another arrival, I anticipate." Back at the estate, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions. The housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, greeted them with a curt nod, her eyes red-rimmed from fatigue or tears. "There's a guest, sir," she said to Poirot. "Mr. Tanios arrived an hour ago. He's in the drawing room with Miss Bella." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Excellent." The players assembled themselves. The drawing room was A study in contrasts. Bella Tanios, pale and fidgety, sat on a velvet sofa, her hands twisting a handkerchief while her husband, Jacob, stood by the window, his broad shoulders framed by sunlight. He turned as Poirot and Hastings entered, his face breaking into a jovial grin. "Monsieur Poirot, a pleasure to meet you," Jacob boomed, striding forward to shake Poirot's hand. "Bella's told me about your visit. Come to write a book about Aunt Emily, have you?" Poirot inclined his head, his eyes never leaving Jacob's. "Something of that nature, Monsieur Tanios. I am a collector of stories, and Mademoiselle Arundel's is most intriguing." "You have just arrived, I understand." "Yes, from London," Jacob said, his tone hearty. "Business kept me there, but I thought it time to join Bella. Family matters, you know." Bella glanced at her husband, her expression unreadable. "Jacob's been so busy," she murmured. "It's kind of him to come." Poirot seated himself, gesturing for Hastings to do the same. "Family matters, they are often complex. Tell me, Monsieur Tanios, were you in Market Basing in April, perhaps on the 17th? Jacob's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "April, let me think. I might have passed through. I travel often, you see. Why do you ask?" "A small matter of a letter," Poirot said airily. "It was posted that day, but delayed. I am curious about the villagers' postal habits." Jacob laughed, though it sounded forced. "Can't help you there, I'm afraid. I don't know the first thing about post offices." Bella's hands tightened on her handkerchief, and Poirot noted it. He turned to her, his voice gentle. "And you, Madame Tanios, you were here in April, caring for your aunt. Did you notice anything unusual about her correspondence?" Bella's eyes widened and she shook her head quickly. "No, nothing, Aunt. Emily wrote letters sometimes, but I didn't. I wasn't involved." Hastings, sensing her discomfort, tried to ease the tension. "It's a lovely house. Mrs. Tanios must have been a comfort to Miss Arundel to have you here." Bella managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Captain. Aunt Emily was kind to me." The conversation drifted to safer topics, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere. Jacob's evasive answers, Bella's nervousness. The clerk's description, they formed a pattern, though its shape was still unclear. As they rose to leave, Poirot paused by the door, his gaze falling on Bob the terrier, who was gnawing his ball in the corner. "Mon petit Bob," Poirot said softly, "you see much, do you not?" Bob looked up, his ears twitching, and Poirot chuckled. To Hastings he added, "Come, we have more to uncover." That afternoon Poirot insisted on revisiting Emily's study, a room lined with oak shelves and heavy drapes. The desk was cluttered with papers, bills, receipts, and a few personal notes. Poirot sifted through them methodically, his gloved hands moving with precision. Hastings, growing restless, paced by the window. "What are you looking for, Poirot?" he asked. "We've been over this room before." "Clarity, Hastings," Poirot replied. "The letter was delayed, but its contents were written here. Perhaps Mademoiselle Arundel left a trace of her fears." He opened a drawer, revealing a stack of envelopes, some sealed, some torn. One caught his ojar blank envelope with a faint wax residue on its flap. He held it to the light, his lips pursing. "Regard as Hastings. This wax, it matches the seal on the delayed letter. Someone practiced here, perhaps to forge or tamper." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "You think Jacob did it?" "He was in the village, by the clerk's account." Poirot shook his head. "We assume nothing. Jacob's presence is a possibility, but Bella, Teresa, Charles Avon, Miss Lawson could have visited the post office. We need more." Their search was interrupted by a knock. Mrs. Jenkins appeared, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, there's a man from the village asking for you. Says it's urgent." In the parlor they found a grizzled groundskeeper, his cap twisted in his hands. "Name's Tom Carter, sir," he said. "I work the gardens here. Overheard you asking about April. Thought you should know I saw Mr. Tanios near the house that day. He was by the postbox, looking shifty." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Near the postbox, you say? At what time? Late afternoon, sir, around. For maybe he didn't see I was pruning the hedges." "Merci, Monsieur Carter," Poirot said. "This is most illuminating." As Carter left, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "That's damning, Poirot. Jacob was at the postbox the day the letter was posted. He must have tampered with it." Poirot raised a finger. "It is suggestive, but not conclusive. Why delay a letter? To prevent its warning from reaching me, or to obscure the timeline of a crime? We must consider all motives." That evening, over dinner at the local inn, Poirot sketched a timeline on a napkin, his pencil moving with deliberate strokes. April 17th, Mademoiselle Arundel writes her letter, mentioning the dog's ball. That same day, Jacob Tanios is seen in the village. The letter is posted but vanishes into a misfiled bag. June 26th, Emily dies. June 28th, the letter arrives. The question is, who benefits from this delay? Hastings frowned. The family, surely. If Emily suspected foul play, the letter could have exposed someone. Or, Poirot said, the letter itself is a distraction, meant to cast suspicion. Elsewhere, we must speak with Jacob again, but carefully. He is no fool. The next morning Poirot found Jacob in the garden, tossing Bob's ball for the terrier to chase. The scene was almost idyllic, but Poirot's approach shattered the calm. Monsieur Tagnos, he said, a word if you please. You were seen in market basing on April 17th near the postbox. Care to explain? Jacob's hand froze mid-throw and Bob yipped impatiently. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. You've got spies everywhere, haven't you? Yes, I was in the village. Bella asked me to post a letter for her. Nothing sinister about it. A letter. Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. To whom? Jacob shrugged. Some friend of hers. I didn't read it. Look, Monsieur Poirot, I'm a busy man. I don't have time for village gossip. He tossed the ball, and Bob bounded after it. But Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Jacob. Gossip, non-facts. A letter was delayed, and your presence raises questions. If you recall more, I am at your service. Jacob's smile was tight. I'll keep that in mind. As Poirot and Hastings walked away, Hastings whispered, he's lying, isn't he? Bella never mentioned sending a letter. Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps Bella hides her own secrets. We must watch them both. The day unfolded. With further inquiries, Poirot spoke to Miss Lawson, Emily's companion, who grew flustered when asked about the post. I never touched Aunt Emily's letters, she insisted, her voice shrill. I only helped with her accounts. Teresa Arundel, lounging in the drawing room, was more composed but equally unhelpful. Letters. I don't bother with such things. Aunt Emily was always scribbling notes. Half of them never got sent. Charles, the nephew, was at the local pub, regaling locals with tales of his speedboat races. When Poirot questioned him, he waved a hand dismissively. April. I was in London, probably. Ask my bookie. Why's this letter such a fuss? Poirot smiled thinly. Because, Monsieur Charles, it speaks of a crime. And crimes, they demand answers. By dusk, Poirot and Hastings sat in their rooms at the inn, the delayed envelope resting on the table between them. Poirot held it up, his fingers tracing the smudged seal. The truth lies in what was hidden, he murmured. This seal, it was broken and resealed. Someone read Mademoiselle Arundel's words and chose to delay them. Jacob, Bella. Another. Tomorrow we dig deeper. Hastings leaned back, his mind whirling. It's like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. How do you stay so calm? Poirot chuckled. The grey cells, Hastings, they do not panic. They arrange, they deduce, they conquer, and with Bob's help, we shall unravel this mystery. As night fell over Market Basing, the village slept, but Poirot's mind was awake, piecing together the fragments of a crime concealed by time and deceit. The delayed dispatch was more than a clerical error. It was a deliberate act, and its architect was closer than anyone suspected. Chapter 7. The Séances Secretes. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Market Basing as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings made their way to the Tripp sisters' cottage. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oaks lining the lane. Poirot, impeccably dressed in his tailored suit despite the summer warmth, adjusted his Homburg hat and tapped his silver-topped cane against the pavement, his steps precise and measured. Hastings, by contrast, walked with a looser stride, his face bright with curiosity about the eccentric sisters they were about to meet. I must say, Poirot, Hastings remarked, breaking the comfortable silence, I'm not sure what to make of this séance business. Green mists, spirits whispering in the night, it all sounds like a load of tosh to me. Surely you don't believe in such nonsense. Poirot's mustache twitched, and his green eyes glinted with amusement. Monsieur Hastings, you are ever the skeptic, but the mind of Hercule Poirot is open, like the pages of a book yet to be written. The Tripp sisters may speak of spirits, but it is the living who hold the secrets. We shall see what truths lie beneath their theatricality. Hastings chuckled, shaking his head. Theatricality is right. Those two remind me of a pair of old actresses hamming it up in a melodrama. Still, I suppose they might have seen something useful, even if they dress it up in mystical claptrap. Precisement, Poirot murmured, his gaze fixed on the quaint cottage ahead. Its thatched roof and ivy-covered walls gave it a fairy-tale charm, but the darkened windows hinted at something less whimsical within. The eyes of the eccentric often see what others miss. Let us listen, and perhaps the shadows will speak. They reached the cottage gate, where a small brass plaque read Rosebank Cottage, Mrs. Minnie and Julia Tripp. Poirot rang the bell, and the door creaked open almost immediately, revealing Minnie Tripp, the elder of the two sisters. Her grey hair was pinned in a loose bun, and her wide eyes sparkled with excitement. She wore a flowing lavender gown that seemed more suited to a Victorian drawing-room than a modern village. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Minnie exclaimed, clasping her hands. Oh, we've been expecting you. The spirits told us you'd come this very afternoon. Do step inside. Julia's preparing the parlor for our little gathering. Hastings raised an eyebrow, but followed Poirot into the dimly lit hallway. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and sandalwood, and every surface seemed cluttered with curios, crystal balls, tarot decks, and faded photographs of stern-faced ancestors. Minnie led them to a cozy parlor where Julia Tripp, slightly younger and more composed, stood arranging a round table draped in black velvet. A single candelabrum flickered at its center, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Welcome, gentlemen," Julia said, her voice calm but tinged with an undercurrent of anticipation. "We're so glad you've come to commune with the unseen. Miss Emily's spirit is restless. You know, she has much to tell us." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression polite but unreadable. "Madame, I am most grateful for your invitation. My friend Captain Hastings and I are eager to hear what insights you may share, whether from this world or another." Hastings stifled a grin, but Minnie's enthusiasm was undeterred. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you'll see. The veil between worlds is thin tonight. Emily's presence is strong. She's been guiding us ever since that dreadful night." The four took their seats around the table, the candlelight casting their faces in a warm, flickering glow. Minnie reached for Poirot's hand, her grip surprisingly firm, while Julia took Hastings with a gentle touch. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Poirot, who merely closed his eyes and inclined his head, as if preparing for a performance. "Let us begin," Julia intoned, her voice dropping to a low, resonant timbre. "We call upon the spirits of the departed, those who linger in the ether. Emily Arundel, we seek your guidance. Speak through us. Reveal the truth hidden in the shadows." The room fell silent, save for the soft crackle of the candles. Hastings felt a prickle of unease, though he told himself it was merely the stuffy air. Minnie's eyes fluttered shut, and she began to sway slightly, her lips parting as if to speak. Then, in a voice unlike her own, deeper, almost mournful, she whispered, the shadow in the house, it moved that night, it betrayed her." Hastings' skepticism wavered for a moment, his eyes darting to Poirot. The detective's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened slightly around Minnie's hand. Julia leaned forward, her voice urgent. Emily, who's the shadow?" Minnie's head tilted back, and she gasped. "The one who waited. The one who watched. They knew the ball would fall. They ensured it." The candles flickered violently, though no breeze stirred the room. Hastings' heart raced, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Poirot's sharp glance silenced him. Minnie slumped forward, her breathing ragged, and Julia gently patted her sister's hand. "She's exhausted," Julia murmured. "The spirits take their toll." Poirot released Minnie's hand and leaned back, his eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "Most intriguing, madam. You say Miss Emily spoke of a shadow in the house, one who ensured the ball would fall. Can you tell me, did you hear anything else that night? Perhaps not from the spirits, but from the world of the living?" Minnie, recovering, blinked at him. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, we heard so much. The spirits are always whispering, but that night, we were in our garden, you see, and we overheard voices from Little Green House. Angry voices, though we couldn't make out the words. And then, that green mist, oh, it was dreadful." "Green mist," Hastings interjected, unable to contain himself. "You mentioned that before. What exactly did you see?" Julia fixed him with a steady gaze. "It was no ordinary mist, Captain. It hovered near Emily's window, glowing faintly, like a warning from the beyond. We saw it just before midnight, the night she passed." Poirot nodded slowly, his fingers steepled. "And these voices, could you tell if they were male or female, young or old?" The sisters exchanged a glance, and Minnie hesitated. "It was hard to say, Monsieur Poirot." The wind carried the words away, but one voice was sharp, like a woman's, and another was deeper, perhaps a man's. "They were arguing, we're sure of it." Poirot's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. "Mercy, madam, you have given us much to consider. Perhaps we might join you again, should the spirits have more to say." As they left the cottage, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the village was bathed in twilight. Hastings let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "Well, that was something, wasn't it? All that talk of shadows and mists. I don't know what to make of it. Do you think they're genuine, Poirot, or just a pair of old eccentrics spinning yarns?" Poirot paused at the gate, his cane tapping thoughtfully against the ground. "Genuine or not, Hastings, they have given us a gift. The spirits may not speak, but the living, they betray themselves. The voices they heard, the mist they saw, these are threads in the tapestry of this mystery. We must follow them." They walked back to the inn in silence, the stars beginning to emerge in the velvet sky. Poirot's mind was a whirl of possibilities, each clue slotting into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The Tripp sisters' séance, theatrical though it was, had confirmed his suspicion. Someone in Little Green House had acted with intent the night of Emily's fall, but who, and why? The next morning, Poirot and Hastings set out to explore the village, seeking to corroborate the sisters' story. They stopped at the local pub, the Red Lion, where the landlord, a jovial man named Tompkins, greeted them warmly. Over a pint of ale for Hastings and a tisane for Poirot, they steered the conversation toward Little Green House. "Sad business about Miss Arundel," Tompkins said, polishing a glass. "She was a proper lady, always kind to the village folk. Her family, though, well, they're a mixed lot, aren't they?" Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know the family well, Monsieur," Tompkins shrugged. "Well enough. Charles, the nephew, he's a charmer, but he's got debts up to his ears. Always talking about that water-speed record of his, like he's the next Malcolm Campbell. Teresa now, she's a looker, but sharp as a tack. Folks say she's got her eye on Dr. Donaldson, the young doctor in town, and Bella, poor Bella's quiet, but her husband, That Tanios fellow, he's a bit of an odd one for him, you know. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. Dr. Donaldson, you say? Is there talk of an attachment between him and Miss Teresa? Tompkins chuckled. Talk. The whole village is buzzing about it. They've been seen walking together, all cozy like, mind you. Teresa's not one to settle down easy. She's got big dreams. That one. Poirot sipped his tisane, his expression thoughtful. And the night Miss Arundel died, did anyone in the village notice anything unusual at Little Green House? Tompkins frowned, scratching his chin. Now you mention it, old Mrs. Jenkins, who lives down the lane, said she saw someone near the house late that night. Couldn't say who. Mind, just a figure in the shadows. She thought it might have been Charles, but it was too dark to be sure. Poirot's mustache twitched, and he set down his cup. Most interesting. Merci, Monsieur Tompkins. You have been most helpful. As they left the pub, Hastings couldn't contain his excitement. Did you hear that, Poirot? A figure in the shadows. It could be our killer sneaking about to tamper with that ball or whatever they did. And Teresa with Dr. Donaldson, that's a motive, isn't it? If Emily disapproved of the match, maybe Teresa had reason to come toy Hastings, Poirot interrupted, raising a hand. You leap to conclusions like a gazelle across the savannah. We have clues, yes, but they are like stars in the sky, beautiful but distant. We must draw them into a constellation before we see the truth. Their next stop was Little Green House, where they hoped to speak with Teresa Arundel. They found her in the drawing room, lounging on a chaise longue with a fashion magazine in hand. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her silk dress clung to her slender frame. She looked up as they entered, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said, setting the magazine aside. To what do I owe the pleasure? Surely you've tired of poking about this dreary old house by now. Poirot bowed, his manner courteous. Mademoiselle, your charm makes even the dreariest house a palace. But we are here on a matter of some importance. May we speak of the night your aunt fell? Teresa's smile faltered and she gestured for them to sit. Of course, it was dreadful, wasn't it? Poor Aunt Emily, tripping over that silly dog's ball. I was in London that night, you know. I only heard about it the next day. Poirot's eyes gleamed. In London, you say? And yet, mademoiselle, you returned to Market Basing shortly after Nan, perhaps to visit a certain Dr. Donaldson. Teresa's cheeks flushed, but she recovered quickly, laughing lightly. You are well informed, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, I've seen Rex Donaldson a few times. He's a dear friend, nothing more. Aunt Emily liked him. You know, she thought he had a good head on his shoulders. Hastings, unable to resist, chimed in a friend. Miss Arundel. The village seems to think it's more than that. Teresa's eyes flashed, but her tone remained cool. The village loves its gossip, Captain. I'm sure you've heard all sorts of nonsense. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment in town. She rose gracefully and swept out of the room, leaving a faint scent of jasmine in her wake. Hastings stared after her, smitten despite himself. She's something, isn't she, Poirot? But I don't know. There's a hardness to her. Do you think she's hiding something? Poirot smiled faintly. Everyone hides something, Hastings. The question is, what? Mademoiselle Teresa is clever, but her alibi for that night, it must be verified. And this Dr. Donaldson, he may hold a key to her heart, and perhaps too, our mystery. That afternoon they visited Dr. Rex Donaldson at his modest surgery in the village. He was a young man, no older than 30, with earnest blue eyes and a nervous manner. He greeted them politely but seemed uneasy as Poirot began his questions. Miss Arundel was a patient of mine, Donaldson said, adjusting his glasses. A fine woman, though stubborn about her health. I saw her a few days before her fall, and she seemed in good spirits. Poirot nodded, his gaze piercing. And Mademoiselle Teresa Arundel, how well do you know her? Dr. Donaldson blushed, his fingers fidgeting with a pen. Teresa, we're friends. She's a remarkable woman, very modern. We've spent some time together, but it's nothing serious. I don't know what you've heard, but calm yourself, Dr. Poirot said smoothly. We seek only the truth. Were you in Market Basing the night Miss Emily fell? Donaldson hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I was. Here I had a late call at the vicarage. Mrs. Carter was ill. I didn't hear about Emily's accident until the next morning. Poirot thanked him and left, his mind churning. As they walked back to the inn, Hastings voiced his thoughts. He seemed genuine, Poirot, but that blush when you mentioned Teresa, there's definitely something between them. And if Teresa was in London, how does that fit with the voices the Tripp sisters heard? Poirot stopped, his cane tapping the ground. The voices, Hastings, they're the key. The Tripp sisters heard an argument, a man and a woman. If Teresa was in London, who was the woman? And if Charles was seen near the house, was he the man? Or is there another player in this game? That evening Poirot and Hastings returned to Little Green House, where they found Miss Lawson, Emily's companion, sorting through old photographs in the study. She started as they entered, her hands fluttering nervously. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you startled me. I was just tidying up. So many memories here. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, landing on a torn photograph half hidden beneath a stack of papers. He picked it up, noting the jagged edge where someone had ripped it in two. The image showed Emily with her nieces and nephew, but one face was missing, torn away. An interesting keepsake, Mademoiselle Lawson, Poirot said, holding up the photograph. Do you know who is missing from this picture? Miss Lawson's eyes widened and she stammered, I don't know. It was like that when I found it. Perhaps it was an accident. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Accidents, mademoiselle, are rare in a case such as this. Tell me, did you ever hear Miss Emily argue with her family, perhaps about her will, or other matters? Miss Lawson's hands twisted together. Oh, Emily was so kind, but her family, they could be difficult. I heard raised voices once or twice, but I never eavesdropped. It wasn't my place. Poirot thanked her and left the study, the torn photograph tucked into his pocket. Outside, he turned to Hastings, his voice low. The spirits do not speak, mon ami, but the living, they betray themselves. This photograph, these voices, the green mist, they are all pieces of the same puzzle. Tomorrow we shall tighten the net. As they retired to the inn, the village clock struck 9, its chimes echoing through the quiet streets. Poirot sat by the window, his fingers tracing the edge of the torn photograph. The mystery was deepening, but Hercule Poirot was not a man to be daunted by shadows. The truth, he knew, was close at hand, waiting to be unveiled by his little grey cells. Chapter 8. The Poison's Path. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room of Little Green House, his small, polished shoes planted firmly on the Persian rug. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany furniture. His mustache twitched as he surveyed the room, his grey cells humming with the rhythm of a puzzle nearing its crescendo. Beside him, Captain Hastings fidgeted, his fingers drumming against the arm of a velvet-holstered chair. The air was thick with the scent of old books and lavender polish, but beneath it lingered something less tangibly faint undercurrent of unease. Poirot, Hastings began, his voice breaking the silence. I don't see why we're lingering here. The family's given us their statements. The Tripp sisters have spun their ghostly tales, and that dog, charming as he is, can't exactly testify. What's next? Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flicked toward his friend. Patience, mon ami, the truth. It does not shout, it whispers. And in this room, in this house, the whispers are becoming clearer. Hastings sighed, settling back into the chair. You're being cryptic again. Care to share what these whispers are saying? Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. All in good time, Hastings. But first we must consult an expert. The good Dr. Granger awaits us, and I suspect he holds a piece of this puzzle, perhaps the most vital one. The mention of Dr. Granger, Emily Arundel's physician, piqued Hastings' interest. You think he missed something about her death? He seemed convinced it was natural causes. Conviction, Hastings, is not always truth. Come, let us pay him a visit, and perhaps, on the way, we shall observe our friend Bob, that terrier. He sees more than most. They stepped out into the crisp morning air, the gravel path crunching underfoot as they made their way toward the village. Little Green House loomed behind them, its ivy-clad walls both grand and somber, as if guarding secrets within its stone. Bob, the wire-haired terrier, bounded out from the garden, his rubber ball clutched triumphantly in his jaws. He dropped it at Poirot's feet, tail wagging furiously. Poirot chuckled, bending to pat the dog's head. Bonjour, mon petit. You are vigilant, Nan. Perhaps you will show us the way. Hastings grinned. He's more likely to show us where he's buried his bones. Perhaps, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing as Bob darted toward the staircase leading to the house's main entrance. The detective paused, watching the dog's movements with an intensity that made Hastings' smile falter. What is it? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he ascended the steps, his gaze fixed on the polished wood of the staircase. A faint mark, barely visible, marred the edge of one step, the same mark he had noted days earlier. He crouched, his fingers tracing the indentation. This stair, Hastings, it tells a story. A story of a fall, and perhaps of something more. Hastings frowned, leaning closer. You're still on about that ball. The housekeeper said it was an accident, Bob's toy left carelessly. Carelessly. Poirot's voice was soft, but there was steel beneath it. Nan, mon ami, nothing in this case is careless. Let us test this theory. He reached into his pocket, producing a small rubber ball he had procured from the village shop, a near replica of Bob's. With deliberate precision, he placed it on the stair, then stepped back. The ball remained still, unmoved by the slight incline. Hastings raised an eyebrow. It doesn't roll. So what? Exactement, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. It does not roll. Yet Miss Arundel fell, and the ball was found at the bottom of the stairs. How, then, did it come to be there? By accident, or by design? The implication hung in the air, heavy as the morning mist. Hastings' face darkened. You're suggesting someone placed it there deliberately to make her fall? Poirot straightened, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. I suggest nothing, Hastings. I observe. And what I observe is that this ball, this stair, this fall, they are not what they seem. Come, we must not keep Dr. Granger waiting. The walk to Dr. Granger's modest surgery in Market Basing was brisk, the village stirring to life around them. Shopkeepers swept their doorsteps, and a milk cart rattled past, its bottles clinking. Poirot's expression remained focused, but Hastings couldn't shake the unease that Poirot's experiment had sparked. The idea that Emily's fall was no accident, that someone in her own family might have orchestrated it, was chilling. Dr. Granger's surgery was a small, tidy building, with a brass plaque gleaming beside the door. The doctor, a wiry man in his late 50s with a shock of grey hair, welcomed them into his office. His desk was cluttered with medical journals and a stethoscope, and the faint smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. "Monsieur Poirot," Captain Hastings Granger said, gesturing to 2 chairs. "I confess, I'm surprised by your visit. Miss Arundel's passing was a sad affair, but straightforward, I thought. What brings you here?" Poirot settled into the chair, his posture impeccable. "Straightforward, you say, yet there are irregularities. Doctor, I wish to discuss Miss Arundel's health in the weeks before her death, her symptoms, her medications, everything." Granger's brow furrowed. "Irregularities, I assure you. Her death was due to liver failure, consistent with her age and chronic ailments. She had been frail for some time." "Frail? Yes," Poirot agreed, his voice smooth. "But tell me, doctor, were there any symptoms that struck you as unusual, perhaps unexpected?" Granger hesitated, his fingers tapping the desk. "Well, she did complain of nausea and fatigue in her final weeks. I attributed it to her condition, but—" He trailed off, his eyes narrowing. "You're suggesting something else, aren't you?" Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "I suggest only that we explore all possibilities. Did you, perhaps, order any tests after her death? A toxicology report, for example?" Granger's face flushed. "A toxicology report? There was no need. Her symptoms were consistent with natural decline. To suggest poisoning, I suggest nothing," Poirot interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "But I ask, was such a report conducted?" Granger sighed, rubbing his temple. "There was a preliminary report, yes, but it was routine. I didn't pursue it further because there was no indication of foul play. The results were inconclusive." "Inconclusive," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. "And where might one find this report?" Granger rose, crossing to a filing cabinet. "I suppose I can dig it out. But I warn you, Monsieur Poirot, you're chasing shadows." Shadows, doctor, often conceal the truth. While Granger rifled through his files, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Poisoning, Poirot? That's a leap, even for you." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Not a leap, Hastings. A step, a careful, deliberate step." Granger returned with a thin folder, placing it before Poirot. "Here it is, but as I said, it's inconclusive. Traces of an unusual substance, but nothing definitive." Poirot opened the folder, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. The report was brief, its clinical language detailing Emily's symptoms and the results of a blood analysis. A single line caught Poirot's eye: "Trace amount of a compound resembling arsenic detected. Source unknown." "Arsenic," Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. Granger stiffened. "Now, hold on. Those levels were negligible, could have been from her medications or even environmental exposure. Arsenic was common in household products years ago." "Negligible," Poirot echoed, closing the folder. "Yet present. Tell me, doctor, who had access to Miss Arundel's medications, who prepared her food, her tea?" Granger's eyes widened. "You're not seriously suggesting I ask questions?" "Doctor, that is all." Granger slumped back in his chair. "Her companion, Miss Lawson, was primarily responsible for her care. The housekeeper, Ellen, handled meals. The family visited occasionally, but they weren't involved in her daily routine." Poirot nodded, tucking the folder under his arm. "Mercy, doctor. You have been most helpful." As they stepped back into the sunlight, Hastings exploded. "Arsenic, Poirot. This changes everything. If Emily was poisoned, if Hastings," Poirot cut in, "we have a trace, nothing more. But it is a thread, and we shall follow it. Now let us return to Little Green House. I wish to speak with Miss Lawson again." The walk back was quieter, Hastings' mind racing with the implications of the toxicology report. Poirot, however, seemed almost serene, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. As they approached the estate, Bob greeted them. His ball once again dropped at Poirot's feet, persistent. "This one," Hastings said, forcing a smile. Poirot knelt, picking up the ball and turning it in his hands. "Persistent, yes, and loyal. He guards his mistress still, does he not?" They found Miss Lawson in the morning room, her hands fluttering nervously as she arranged a vase of roses. Her round face, framed by graying curls, flushed at their arrival. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. I didn't expect you again so soon." Poirot bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle, your kindness to Miss Arundel is well known. I have a few more questions, if you permit." Miss Lawson's eyes darted to the door, then back to Poirot. "Of course, anything to help." Poirot settled into a chair, his demeanor disarming. "You were close to Miss Arundel, yes? You prepared her medications, perhaps her tea?" Miss Lawson nodded, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. "Yes, I helped with her pills. The doctor prescribed them, and I'd bring her tea sometimes, but Ellen usually handled the kitchen." And in the weeks before her death, Poirot continued, did you notice anything unusual? Perhaps a change in her health? Miss Lawson hesitated, her eyes flickering. She was tired, poor dear, and she felt sick some days. I thought it was her age, but her voice faltered. But Poirot prompted, his voice gentle. Miss Lawson's hands trembled. One night, I heard footsteps. Late, after everyone was asleep, I thought it was my imagination, but they were near her room. Hastings leaned forward. Footsteps, did you see anyone? Miss Lawson shook her head. No, I didn't dare look. I stayed in my room. But the next morning Miss Arundel was worse. I should have said something, but I didn't want to cause a fuss. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was racing. You have done well to tell us now, mademoiselle. These footsteps, they were heavy, light, a man's perhaps, or a woman's. I couldn't say, Miss Lawson whispered. They were soft, but deliberate. Oh, I feel so dreadful keeping this to myself. Poirot rose, patting her hand. You have helped more than you know. Rest now, mademoiselle. We shall take care of the rest. Outside, Hastings could barely contain himself. Footsteps. Someone was sneaking about, and now we have arsenic in the picture. This is no accident. Poirot's expression was grave. No, Hastings, it is not. But we must tread carefully. The poison's path is subtle, and the one who laid it is clever. They returned to the staircase, Poirot's eyes once again drawn to the marked step. He placed Bob's ball on it, watching as it remained still. Then, with a sudden movement, he nudged it with his foot, sending it tumbling to the bottom. Hastings gasped. What was that for? To confirm, Poirot said, descending the stairs. The ball was placed here, yes, but it was not an accident. Someone ensured it would cause a fall, and if they went to such lengths, what else might they have done? The afternoon passed in a blur of interviews. Poirot spoke with Ellen, the housekeeper, who confirmed Miss Lawson's account of Emily's declining health. She also mentioned a strange incident. A bottle of weed killer containing arsenic had gone missing from the garden shed weeks before Emily's death. Weed killer, Hastings exclaimed. That's it, Poirot. Someone used it to poison her. Poirot's eyes narrowed, perhaps, but we need more than supposition. We need proof. Their next stop was the garden shed, a small weathered structure tucked behind the rosebeds. Bob followed, his tail wagging as he sniffed the ground. Inside, the shed was cluttered with tools, pots, and shelves of gardening supplies. Poirot's gaze swept the room, landing on a dusty shelf where a faint outline suggested a bottle had once stood. Missing, he murmured, his fingers brushing the shelf. And conveniently so, Bob barked, pawing at a corner of the shed. Poirot knelt, prying up a loose floorboard to reveal a small empty vial. He held it to the light, his expression triumphant. Mon petit, you are a detective in your own right. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Is that a vial, Hastings? Perhaps the very one that held our poison. We shall have it analyzed. The discovery electrified the investigation. Poirot sent the vial to a chemist in London with instructions for a thorough analysis. As evening fell, they returned to Little Green House, the weight of their findings pressing heavily on them. In the drawing room, Poirot stood before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Bob lay at his feet, his ball clutched between his paws. Hastings paced, his mind a whirlwind of theories. Poirot, we're close, aren't we? The arsenic, the vial, the footsteps, it all points to someone in this house. Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. Close, yes, but the picture is not complete. The poison, the fall, the delayed letter, they are threads in a tapestry, and at the center, Hastings, is our friend Bob. Bob. Hastings stopped pacing, incredulous. He's a dog, Poirot, a dog, yes, but a witness. He saw the one who placed the ball. He heard the footsteps, and he guards the truth, in his own way. Hastings shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. You're putting an awful lot of faith in a terrier. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Faith, Hastings, is not required, only observation. And, Bob, he observes everything. The evening brought a surprise visitor. Charles Arundel, Emily's nephew, sauntered into the drawing room, his usual charm tinged with unease. Heard you've been poking around, Poirot. Find anything interesting? Poirot's smile was polite but guarded. Many things. Monsieur Arundel, tell me, where were you the night of your aunt's fall? Charles laughed. But it was forced me, probably at the pub. I don't keep a diary, you know, Nat. Poirot's tone was mild. Yet the groundskeeper saw you near the house that evening. Curious, is it not? Charles' smile faltered. Look, I might have stopped by to check on her family duty and all that. Nothing sinister about it. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, of course. Merci, monsieur. As Charles left, Hastings turned to Poirot. He's hiding something. Did you see his face? I saw, Hastings, and I heard. But Charles is but one piece of this puzzle. We must consider all the players. The night deepened, and Poirot retired to his room, a small notebook in hand. He sketched a timeline, his pencil moving with precision. The fall, the letter, the arsenic, the footsteps, each event a dot in a constellation of deceit. At the center, he drew a small, crude sketch of Bob, a smile tugging at his lips. Mon petit, he whispered, you saw it all, did you not? The next morning, Poirot and Hastings returned to the staircase. determined to recreate the night of the fall. Poirot placed the ball on the stair, then stepped back, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Bob watched, his head tilted as if understanding the gravity of the moment. "Imagine Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "It is night. The house is quiet. Miss Arundel descends these stairs, perhaps to fetch something. The ball is here placed just so. She steps, she stumbles, she falls. But why? Why the ball, when poison was already at work?" Hastings frowned. To make it look like an accident perhaps, or perhaps to hasten her end. The poison was slow, subtle, the fall immediate. They spent the morning interviewing the family again, each member's story scrutinized under Poirot's relentless gaze. Teresa, elegant as ever, denied any knowledge of the weed killer. Bella, timid and tearful, insisted she'd never harm her aunt. Jacob, Bella's husband, was evasive, his jovial demeanor cracking under pressure. As noon approached, a telegram arrived from the London chemist. Poirot tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents. The vial. Hastings. It contained arsenic, traces, but unmistakable. Hastings' jaw dropped. "That's it. Then proof. Proof of poison." "Yes," Poirot said, folding the telegram, "but not of the poisoner. That, mon ami, requires one final step." The afternoon brought another revelation. Miss Lawson, summoned again, broke down under Poirot's gentle questioning. "I saw something," she sobbed, "that night, before the fall, a shadow in the hall, near Miss Arundel's room. I thought it was a dream, but it wasn't." "A shadow," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. "And did this shadow have a face?" Miss Lawson shook her head, tears streaming. "I couldn't see, but it moved so quietly, like it didn't want to be heard." Poirot thanked her, his mind racing. The shadow, the footsteps, the vial, they were converging, pointing to a single, elusive truth. He returned to the drawing room, Bob at his heels, and stood before the fireplace once more. "Hastings," he said, his voice low, "we are close, very close, but the final piece eludes me still." Bob barked, dropping his ball at Poirot's feet. The detective knelt, picking it up, his eyes narrowing. "You, mon petit, you know, do you not?" Hastings watched, bemused. "Poirot, you're talking to a dog," Poirot chuckled, rising. "And why not? He is the only one in this house who cannot lie." The day ended with Poirot deep in thought, his notebook filled with diagrams and notes. The poison's path was clear as cynic, administered slowly, perhaps in tea or food. The fall, a deliberate act to mask the murder. The letter delayed to obscure the timeline, but the who, the why, they remained just out of reach. As night fell, Poirot stood at his window, gazing out at the moonlit garden. Bob curled up at his feet, his ball tucked beneath his chin. The detective's eyes softened, but his mind was relentless. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "we shall unmask the shadow, and you, mon petit, shall lead the way." The chapter closed with the quiet of Little Green House, its secrets poised to unravel under Poirot's unyielding scrutiny. The poison's path had been traced, but the final confrontation loomed, promising a resolution as intricate and satisfying as the mystery itself. Chapter 9. The family fractures. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Little Green House, its golden rays filtering through the tall windows of the drawing room where Hercule Poirot stood, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the faces of the Arundel family. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the grand estate held their breath, waiting for the storm to break. Captain Hastings, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, shifted uncomfortably, his notebook open on his lap, though his pen had not touched the page in some time. The family, Teresa, Bella, Charles, and Miss Lawson, sat in a semicircle, their expressions a mixture of unease, defiance, and thinly veiled hostility. Poirot had summoned them here, his tone polite but firm, and now the moment had come to stir the pot, as he had promised himself the night before. "Madame et Messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm yet commanding, "we are gathered to discuss the matter of Miss Emily Arundel's death. It is a matter most grave, for I am convinced that her passing was not, as it first appeared, the gentle hand of nature, but rather the work of a deliberate and cunning mind." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Teresa, her dark hair swept elegantly into a chignon, arched an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint, skeptical smile. "Really, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "you do have a flair for the dramatic. Aunt Emily was old, frail, she fell, she lingered, she died. What more is there to it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching slightly as he turned to her. "Mademoiselle Teresa, you are correct that I am a man of precision, perhaps even of drama. But it is the truth that interests me, not theatrics. And the truth, it is like a puzzle, each piece must fit, or the picture is incomplete. There are pieces here that do not fit. The letter, for instance, delayed by 2 months. The fall, blamed on the little dog Bob, yet the ball, it does not roll as it should. And the will, that sudden change. It speaks of motives, does it not?" Charles, lounging in a chair with a careless air, laughed softly, though his eyes darted nervously toward his sister. "Motives? Come now, Poirot, you're not suggesting one of us had a hand in it?" Aunt Emily was stubborn as a mule. but she wasn't worth killing over. Besides, who'd want to risk it all for a few pounds? A few pounds. Poirot's voice was sharp, cutting through Charles' casual tone. Monsieur Arundel, the estate of Miss Emily is no small matter. A fortune, some might say, and fortunes, they have a way of turning hearts to stone. Let us not pretend otherwise. Bella, seated beside her husband Jacob, who had returned from his abrupt departure to Smyrna only that morning, clutched her hands tightly in her lap. Her plain face was pale, her eyes wide with anxiety. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, I loved Aunt Emily. I would never, none of us would speak for yourself. Bella. Charles interrupted, his tone biting. Some of us weren't exactly rolling in money. You and Jacob, for instance, those debts of yours, they must weigh heavy, eh? And don't think I haven't noticed how cozy you've been with Miss Lawson, sniffing around for scraps. Bella gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Charles, how dare you? Jacob and I, we've struggled, yes, but to suggest we'd harm Aunt Emily enough. Jacob's voice boomed, startling everyone. He stood, his broad frame imposing, his face flushed with anger. My wife is no schemer, Charles. If anyone's got a motive, it's you, with your gambling debts and that ridiculous boat of yours, always chasing glory, never mind the cost. Poirot raised a hand, his gesture silencing the room. Please, let us not descend into chaos. Accusations, they are easy to make, but the truth, it requires evidence, and evidence I have begun to uncover. Hastings, who had been watching the exchange with growing frustration, leaned forward. Poirot, for heaven's sake, stop being so cryptic. If you've got something, out with it. Who do you suspect? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his eyes never leaving the family. Mon ami, patience is a virtue. The truth, it is like a fine wine, it must be savored, not gulped. But I will say this. There is one among you who has been less than honest, one who has tampered with documents, perhaps even with the very letter that brought me here, and one who, I believe, knows more about the night of Miss Emily's fall than they have admitted. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like a fog. Miss Lawson, who had been sitting quietly, her hands nervously twisting a handkerchief, suddenly stood, her face flushed. I can't stand this, Monsieur Poirot. I swear, I only ever wanted to help Miss Emily. She was kind to me, kinder than anyone. The will, it was her choice, not mine. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. Mademoiselle Lawson, your devotion to Miss Emily is noted. But devotion, it can blind us to the actions of others. Tell me, did you ever see anyone near that drawer in Miss Emily's study? The one where she kept her papers? Miss Lawson hesitated, her eyes darting to Bella, then to Charles. I don't know. There were so many visitors that week. Teresa, Charles, even Jacob, they all came and went. I didn't think anything of it. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Mercy, mademoiselle, you have been most helpful. That conversation shifted to the events of the night of Emily's fall. Poirot, with his characteristic precision, began to question each family member about their whereabouts. Teresa claimed she had been in London, dining with friends, though her alibi was vague, her tone defensive. Charles admitted to being in market-basing but insisted he was at the local pub, a claim Poirot noted with a raised eyebrow. Bella and Jacob, living nearby, said they had visited earlier in the day but left before the fall, though Jacob's sudden trip to Smyrna cast doubt on his story. As the questioning continued, Poirot's attention turned to a small, overlooked detail, a forged document he had discovered in Emily's study, hidden among her papers. It was a codicil to the will, dated just before her fall, but the handwriting was subtly different, the ink too fresh for its supposed age. This document, Poirot said, holding it aloft, it is a forgery. Someone sought to alter Miss Emily's wishes, perhaps to ensure their own gain. Who among you would dare such a thing? The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Charles laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. If anyone's forging things, it's probably Bella, trying to secure her share before Jacob runs off with it. Bella's eyes filled with tears, and she turned to her husband, who placed a protective arm around her. That's enough, Charles, Jacob growled. You've always been jealous of Bella's closeness to Aunt Emily. You'd do anything to shift the blame. Teresa, who had been silent, suddenly stood, her eyes flashing. This is absurd. You're all acting like children, squabbling over money. That none of us have yet, Monsieur Poirot. If you have proof, show it, otherwise stop tormenting us. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Proof, mademoiselle, is what I seek, and I am close, oh so close to finding it. But for now, I ask you to reflect. Reflect on your actions, your words, your secrets. Tomorrow we shall meet again, and then the pot will boil over, and the truth, it will rise. The family dispersed, their faces a mixture of anger, fear, and confusion. Hastings, trailing Poirot as they left the drawing-room, could contain himself no longer. Poirot, you're driving me mad. You've got something up your sleeve, I know it. Why not tell me? I'm your friend, aren't I? Poirot chuckled, patting Hastings on the shoulder. Mon cher Hastings, you are indeed my friend, and your loyalty, it warms the heart. But the mind of Hercule Poirot, it works in its own way. To reveal too soon is to spoil the recipe. Trust me, mon ami, tomorrow all will be clear. As they stepped into the garden, Bob, the wire-haired terrier, bounded toward them, his ball clutched in his mouth. He dropped it at Poirot's feet, his eyes bright with expectation. Poirot knelt, scratching the dog's ears. You, mon petit, you see more than they know. Tomorrow you will help me, will you not? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting little green house in shadow. The stage was set, the players in place, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, was ready to bring the mystery to its climax. Chapter 10. The Dumb Witness Speaks. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand drawing-room of Little Green House, his polished shoes gleaming under the soft glow of the chandelier. The room, with its heavy velvet curtains and ornate furniture, seemed to hold its breath as the assembled guests shifted uneasily in their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a subtle sign of the satisfaction he felt at this moment, the culmination of his meticulous investigation. Captain Hastings, seated to his left, fiddled with his cufflinks, his brow furrowed as he tried to anticipate his friend's next move. Around them sat the Arundel family and their associates, Teresa poised but pale, Bella clutching a handkerchief, Charles, lounging, with feigned nonchalance, Miss Lawson, trembling like a leaf, and the Tripp sisters, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Bob the wire-haired terrier lay at Poirot's feet, his bright eyes fixed on his temporary master as if he, too, knew the hour of truth had arrived. Poirot cleared his throat, a small, deliberate sound that commanded instant silence. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice smooth and precise. We are gathered here to unravel the mystery of Miss Emily Arundel's death. A death, I must say, that was not the gentle passing of an elderly lady, but a crime most foul. Murder disguised with cunning. A gasp rippled through the room, though Poirot's keen eyes noted that not all reactions were equal. Miss Lawson's hands flew to her mouth, while Charles merely raised an eyebrow, his smirk barely suppressed. Let us begin, Poirot continued, pacing slowly before the fireplace, with a letter written by Miss Arundel on May 1st, yet not received by Hercule Poirot until June 28th after her death. This delay, it was no accident. It was a calculated act to ensure that her plea for help would arrive too late. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The letter spoke of the incident of the dog's ball, an event Miss Arundel believed was no mere mishap. She suspected someone in this very house wished her harm, and she was correct. Hastings leaned forward, his notebook forgotten on his lap. He had heard Poirot's theories over the past days, but the pieces were only now falling into place. The others, however, wore expressions ranging from confusion to dread. Teresa's fingers tightened around her teacup, the porcelain clinking faintly against its saucer. Poirot turned to Bob, who tilted his head as if acknowledging his cue. This little one, Poirot said, bending to pat the terrier's wiry fur, is the dumb witness of our tale. Bob, with his ball, was blamed for Miss Arundel's fall down the staircase, a fall that, at first, seemed an accident. But Hercule Poirot does not accept coincidence so readily. The mark on the stair, the ball's unlikely position, the absence of Bob's usual exuberance that night, these were clues that spoke of sabotage. The Tripp sisters exchanged glances, their earlier talk of green mists and spirits now seeming trivial in the face of Poirot's logic. Miss Lawson whimpered softly, her eyes darting toward the door as if contemplating escape. Poirot, however, was relentless. The fall was no accident, he declared. It was an attempt to hasten Miss Arundel's death, orchestrated by someone who stood to gain from her demise. But when the fall did not kill her, another method was employed: poison, administered slowly, insidiously, until her heart could bear no more. Bella Tanyos gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Poison, she whispered, her voice trembling. But who would do such a thing? Her husband Jacob, who had returned from Smyrna only hours before, placed a protective hand on her shoulder. Though his own face was ashen, Poirot raised a finger, his eyes gleaming. To answer that, we must consider the will. Miss Arundel, after her fall, changed her will, leaving her fortune to Miss Lawson, her companion. This act enraged her family, who had long counted on their inheritance. But was the will the motive, or merely a distraction? Let us examine the suspects, one by one, and see where the truth lies. He turned first to Charles Arundel, whose casual posture belied the tension in his jaw. Monsieur Charles, Poirot said, you are a man of ambition. Yes, your attempts at water-speed records, your debts piling high, these suggest a need for funds. The groundskeeper saw you near Little Green House the night of the fall. And your charm, it is a mask for a reckless heart. Did you, perhaps, place the ball on the stair, hoping to secure your aunt's fortune? Charles laughed, though the sound was brittle. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'd never hurt Aunt Emily. Besides, I was nowhere near the house that night. Ask anyone. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. We shall see, he he said, moving on to Teresa. Mademoiselle Teresa, your elegance is matched only by your determination. Your affair with Dr. Donaldson, it suggests a desire for a life beyond your means. Did you, too, grow impatient with your aunt's longevity? Teresa's eyes flashed with defiance. That's absurd, she snapped. I loved Aunt Emily, and my personal life is none of your business. Poirot nodded, unperturbed, and turned to Bella. Madame Tanios, you are the quiet one, the one who suffers in silence. Your financial struggles, your husband's ambition, these drive you to act. Or was it your fear of losing your children's future? Bella shook her head vehemently, tears welling in her eyes. No, I wouldn't. Jacob Tanios stood abruptly, his face flushed. This is outrageous, Poirot. My wife is innocent. You have no proof. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Patience, Monsieur Tanios. We come now to Miss Lawson. The companion shrank under his gaze, her hands twisting in her lap. You, mademoiselle, inherited Miss Arundel's fortune. A fortune you did not expect. Your nervous disposition, your faltering stories, do they hide guilt, or merely fear? Miss Lawson's voice was barely audible. I loved Miss Emily. I never wanted her money. I didn't know about the will until after. Poirot's eyes softened, but only for a moment. And yet, he said, someone in this room knew. Someone tampered with the letter, ensuring it was delayed. Someone placed the ball on the stair. Someone administered poison, drop by deadly drop. And that someone is... He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on each face. The silence was unbearable, broken only by Bob's soft whine. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. Monsieur Jacob Tanios. The room erupted. Bella screamed, clutching her husband's arm. Jacob's face strained of color, his jovial mask crumbling. This is preposterous, he shouted. You have no evidence. Poirot remained calm, his hands clasped behind his back. Oh, but I do, monsieur. Let us reconstruct the crime, step by step, with the aid of our little witness, Bob. He gestured to the terrier, who sat upright, as if ready to testify. First, the letter, Poirot said. Miss Arundel wrote to me on May 1st, suspecting foul play after her fall. But you, Monsieur Tanios, intercepted it. As a frequent visitor to Little Greenhouse, you had access to the post. You tampered with the envelope, ensuring it was misfiled at the post office, a simple act, but effective. The clerk's testimony confirms an envelope with a disturbed wax seal, bearing your fingerprints. Jacob's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Poirot continued, relentless. Next, the fall. You knew Bob's habits, his love for his ball. You placed it on the stair, securing it with a dab of adhesive to ensure it would not roll until Miss Arundel stepped on it. The faint mark on the stair, it was the residue of your handiwork. Bob, poor creature, was blamed, but his behavior that night, his reluctance to fetch the ball, told me he was innocent. Hastings nodded, recalling Poirot's earlier observations. The others listened, transfixed, as Poirot wove his tale. When the fall failed to kill Miss Arundel, Poirot said, you turned to poison. As a chemist by training, you had access to substances that could mimic natural decline. The local chemist confirmed a purchase of such a substance, made in your name, though you claimed it was for your work. Drop by drop, you administered it. In Miss Arundel's tea, her medicine opportunities you seized during your visits. Dr. Granger's toxicology report, overlooked at first, confirms the presence of this poison in her system. Bella sobbed, her head buried in her hands. Jacob, tell them it's not true, she pleaded. Jacob's voice was hoarse. It's lies, all of it. You can't prove I was here. Poirot's smile was cold. But I can, monsieur. The torn photograph in Miss Arundel's study, it showed you at Little Greenhouse the day before the fall, a detail you omitted. And Bob, our faithful witness, he barked at your suitcase when you arrived today, recognizing the scent of the adhesive. You used a dog's nose. It does not lie. Bob, as if on cue, let out a sharp bark, his eyes fixed on Jacob. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words crushing any remaining doubt. Why? Bella whispered, her voice breaking. Why would you do this? Poirot answered for him. Monsieur Tanios was desperate. Your family's debts, Madame Tanios, were mounting. Your husband's ambitions to start a new life in Smyrna, to secure your children's future required funds, he did not have. Miss Arundel's fortune was the solution, but only if she died before changing her will again. When she survived the fall, he ensured her silence with poison. The will, favoring Miss Lawson, was an unexpected complication, but he hoped to contest it later. Jacob slumped in his chair, his defiance gone. I did it for us, Bella, he muttered, for the children. Bella turned away, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. Poirot's expression was one of pity, but his resolve was iron. You underestimated Hercule Poirot, he said softly, and you underestimated Bob, the dumb witness who saw it all. He turned to the others, his voice firm. The police have been informed. Monsieur Tanios will face justice. As for the rest of you, let this be a lesson. Greed, it poisons the heart as surely as any substance. Miss Lawson, tears streaming down her face, spoke up. What about the money? I don't want it, not like this. Poirot nodded approvingly. A wise decision. mademoiselle. Perhaps you will honor Miss Arundel's memory by using it for good." The Tripp sisters, for once speechless, clutched each other's hands. Teresa and Charles exchanged uneasy glances, their own motives laid bare though they had not crossed the line into murder. Hastings, ever loyal, scribbled furiously in his notebook, determined to capture every detail of Poirot's triumph. As the police arrived, discreetly escorting Jacob from the room, Poirot knelt beside Bob, scratching behind the terrier's ears. "You, mon petit, were the finest witness of all," he murmured. Bob wagged his tail, dropping his ball at Poirot's feet as if to say, "Case closed." The drawing room emptied slowly, the guests dispersing into the cool evening air. Hastings lingered, watching Poirot adjust his tie with characteristic precision. "Well, Poirot," he said, "you've done it again. But I must say, I never thought a dog would play such a role." Poirot chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They are aided by the simplest of creatures. Bob, he saw what we could not, and now, mon ami, shall we return to London? I fancy a quiet evening with it." They stepped into the night, the lights of Little Green House fading behind them. Bob, now in the care of a kind villager who had promised to spoil him rotten, barked a final farewell from the garden. The case was closed, the truth revealed, and Hercule Poirot's reputation as the greatest detective of his age shone brighter than ever. But as they boarded the train to London, Poirot's mind was already turning to the next mystery, the next puzzle that would challenge his little grey cells. For Hercule Poirot, the world was full of secrets, and he would uncover them all, one by one, with the precision of a master. The train whistle blew, and Market Basing vanished into the darkness. Hastings, lulled by the rhythm of the rails, dozed off, dreaming of terriers and triumphs. Poirot, however, remained awake, his eyes fixed on the horizon, a faint smile playing on his lips. The game, as always, was afoot. And so, the story of the dumb witness came to its end, a tale of greed, deception, and the unerring instinct of a loyal dog. Bob, the wire-haired terrier, had played his part, and Hercule Poirot had ensured that justice was served. The village of Market Basing would talk of this case for years to come, a legend woven into its quiet streets, a reminder that even the smallest creature could hold the key to the greatest of truths. As the train carried them home, Poirot's thoughts drifted to Miss Emily Arundel, a woman whose final act writing that letter had set this chain of events in motion. "Rest in peace, mademoiselle," he whispered, his voice lost in the hum of the engine. "Your voice was heard, and your witness, he spoke for you." The stars above twinkled, and the night stretched on, carrying Hercule Poirot toward his next adventure, wherever it might lead.